Chapter 198. Because of the opening of the skating rink, the businesses near Hohai also welcomed the peak season, so Chenshi was really picking up money recently. Originally, when the business was good, he should have closed the shop to take care of the children. But Qiao Yuan's timely appearance saved Chenshi a lot of trouble. Qiao Yuan was not a delicate rich girl, and her hands and feet were very agile. She did the work of the tea house alone. In fact, although the business of the tea house was good, there was not much work. Therefore, after work, Qiao Yuan even had time to sit behind the bar to review her homework, which could be regarded as thoroughly carrying forward her spirit of being a top student. Since Chenshi did not need to guard the shop at all times, and the skating rink was opened again, the three little guys were naturally happy. They now went to the skating rink every day, and Chenshi naturally became the king of the children. They often went abroad, and their skating skills were good. A 4-year-old child was at the age when people liked them. In addition, they did not cause trouble to annoy people, so after a period of time, most of the staff of the skating rink knew these 3 cute little guys. Ninyan, Wenwen, Ming. Once Chenshi took them to the skating rink, there would immediately be people greeting them warmly. The bustle of Hohai was always intermittent, and in the blink of an eye, it was already February. February 8th, after the beginning of spring, Little New Year. With the start of the first wave of homecoming craze, the peak period of the Shikahai skating rink was finally over. The resident population of Shangjing was as many as 20 million, but the foreign population accounted for 8 million. In addition, the household registration in Shangjing did not mean that the hometown was in Shangjing. Therefore, once the homecoming craze started, when people left Shangjing with a year's harvest, the bustle of Shangjing became desolate at a speed visible to the naked eye. Gu Lao's hometown was in Jizhou, so he also took the 2 brothers away. This time, they would have to come back after the Lantern Festival. When the little guy heard the news, she was stunned. After all, she had only been in this world for a short time. This was also the first time in her short life experience that she experienced the feeling of being separated from her friends. That feeling was very strange, different from when Aunt Zhang left, but it also made her very uncomfortable, unaccustomed, and unhappy. The little fellow didn't roll on the ground or cry. She just pursed her lips and waved goodbye to the brothers in a daze. "Goodbye, little sister. We'll come and play with you after the new year." "Goodbye." Gu Lao led the 2 brothers away. Chenshi held the little fellow's hand and stood outside the tea house, silently watching them disappear into the distant corner of the street. Feeling that the little fellow's hand was a little cold, Chenshi used his true essence to warm it up. The sudden warmth startled the little fellow. Thus, she looked up at Chenshi and murmured, "Papa," outside a small tea house in Hohai. The father and daughter stood hand in hand. The little fellow looked up while Chenshi lowered his head. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. Chenshi rubbed her head, then squatted beside the little girl. Seeing this, the little fellow took 2 steps forward, took the initiative to lean into his arms, and then wrapped her arms around Chenshi's neck. Chenshi picked up the little fellow, scratched her nose, and asked with a smile, "Not happy?" The little fellow pouted and nodded. Her pink little face was like the spring that was about to come at the end of winter, like a flower bud that was about to bloom. Coupled with that pitiful look of grievance, it really melted Chenshi's heart. Killing by acting cute. And it was his own daughter's acting cute. Not to mention that he was only in the semi-god realm, even an immortal emperor would not be able to resist this. Moo. Chenshi kissed the little fellow's face heavily. But the little fellow waved her little hands, trying to push Chenshi away. At the same time, she did not forget to pout and shout, "Papa, you're so annoying." Seeing her look of disdain, Chenshi couldn't help but laugh. The little princess was angry, so he had to coax her. Looking at the little fellow in his arms, Chenshi was really dazzled by her cute appearance. What meant that the toughness that had been tempered 100 times turned into softness. After pinching her little face again, Chenshi smiled slightly, then looked at the little fellow and asked seriously, "Nyan, don't be angry. Daddy will show you a magic trick, okay?" Hearing what he said, the little fellow's big eyes rolled for a moment, and she pouted as if she was thinking. After a long time, she said very proudly, "Okay." Nay, Chen Shi made the sound of a horse galloping, and the little fellow immediately giggled. Seeing that the little fellow finally smiled, Chen Shi held her tightly in his arms, then shouted, "Let's go, the princess is going." As soon as his voice fell, he held the little fellow and soared into the sky, straight into the clouds. In ancient times, King Yu of Zhou played with the warlords with the beacon fire, Wu Sangde was angry for a beauty, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang rode in the red dust, and the concubines laughed. Today, there was Qin Shi, blue sky moon to the clouds. This was not the first time that Qin Shi had shown inhuman means in front of the little fellow. But if the previous ones were acceptable, then this time, it was really a bit exaggerated. He held the little fellow and soared into the sky, and in an instant he had flown into the clouds. The little fellow's eyes were dazzled, and before she came back to her senses, she found that she was already in a thick fog. Because there was no sound and no sense of weightlessness, she did not know what was going on at all. What was the white cloud like? In fact, it was just a cloud of mist. When people were in the clouds, it was actually like being in the thick fog in the winter morning. The little fellow lay on Qin Shi's shoulder, looking around. But the thick fog covered her eyes, so she could not see anything at all. Qin Shi deliberately paused in the clouds, gently pinched the little fellow's little face, and then said with a smile, "Baby, watch carefully. Daddy is going to show you a magic trick." But the little fellow did not care about being angry at this time, because the sudden change in the surrounding environment had completely attracted her attention. Human beings always had a natural fear of the unknown. But if this was Daddy's magic trick, then the little fellow would not be afraid, but would only feel curious. Seeing the little fellow nodding, Qin Shi smiled, and then rushed out of the clouds with her. In an instant, the bright sun shone on the little fellow, and she closed her eyes tightly. It was still a dark winter in Shangjing, but in the blink of an eye, it was like coming to a tropical beach that was like spring all year round. The sun was blooming with thousands of golden clusters, like a kind grandfather, smiling at the little fellow. Huff! The little fellow squinted her eyes for a long time to adapt. When she opened her eyes, what came into her eyes was a vast sea of clouds. The blue sky, the dazzling sun, as well as the boundless white clouds beneath Qin Shi's feet. The little fellow was stunned. After coming back to her senses, she quickly poked her head out to look at Qin Shi's feet. Just like when she visited Kunming Lake at night, the little fellow only saw that Qin Shi was like an immortal walking in the clouds, stepping on the white clouds and leisurely walking toward the distance with her. The clouds paved the road, and people walked in the sky. Chapter 199. In Qin Shi's Lolita training plan, he did not want the little fellow to come into contact with the inhuman power too early. Therefore, when he took the little fellow to the clouds to take a look at the scenery, Qin Shi quickly took the little fellow back to the ground. The little fellow had not started to re-journey to the west, so she had no concept of riding the clouds. In addition, when Qin Shi was flying, he deliberately blocked her sight. Therefore, in the little fellow's cognition, she just felt that her father took her to a very strange place all of a sudden. But as for where it was, her father did not say, so she did not know. In the blink of an eye, they were in the sky, and in the blink of an eye, they were on the ground. For a 4-year-old little fellow, this was really an interesting trick. When the father and daughter returned to the tea house, the little fellow was still sitting in Qin Shi's arms excitedly. She kept twisting her small body and shouted excitedly, "Papa! Do it again! Do it again!" Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled and pinched her little face. Then he said mysteriously, "There is not enough time today. We have to go home for dinner. Daddy will show you more interesting magic tricks in the future, okay?" The little fellow tilted her head and thought for a while. Perhaps she was interested in the more novel tricks he said, so after thinking for a while, she grinned and said, "Okay. Good girl." The father and daughter talked as they returned to the bar. Qiao Yuan did not know what they had just done. When she saw Qin Shi coming over with the little fellow, she immediately got up and said, "Boss, this is today's account. Do you want to see it?" While speaking, Qiao Yuan handed over the bill. Qin Ruing used to calculate the account when she had nothing to do, but Qin Shi was completely a hands-off boss. Therefore, after opening the business for several months, She had not seen him calculate the account even once. The little girl was smart, diligent, and attentive. Even though She didn't arrange any work for her, Qiao Yuan still did the accounts for this period of time clearly. Every day's income was clear at a glance. She took the account book from Qiao Yuan's hand. After glancing at it casually, he put the account book back on the bar. Qiao Yuan got up and gave him the position of the shopkeeper. She did not refuse. He sat on the chair with the little fellow in his arms. He opened the drawer under the bar and saw the profit of the tea house this month. The red 100 yuan bills were placed in a pile, and the 50s and 20s were placed in order. After a rough count, there were tens of thousands of them. She casually fiddled with the money in the drawer. Then he took out a stack from the inside and put it directly into Qiao Yuan's hand. "You've been working here for more than a month. It's been hard on you. This is your bonus and salary. Take it." Looking at the stack of $100 bills that She handed over, Qiao Yuan froze on the spot. Even if there were not 10,000 in this stack, there were at least 8,000. When she came, she did not think about asking for a penny. Now that She gave her so much money, Qiao Yuan naturally could not accept it. "I can't take this money. Working in the tea house is so boring. I didn't do much and I owe you a big favor. I can't take a penny from you." As she spoke, Qiao Yuan ran out of the bar counter like a wisp of smoke. Looking at her, she was probably afraid that She would insist on giving her the money. Seeing this, She could only purposely keep a straight face and said to Qiao Yuan with a serious face, "That's another matter. It's already the spring festival. If you don't accept this money, then I'll be angry." "No, I can't take your money. Dad as well. Our family is not short of money, and I don't want money," Qiao Yuan said very hesitantly. She did not want to take a penny, but She's attitude was so firm that it put her in a difficult position. She wanted to give it, but Qiao Yuan did not accept it. At this time, it was natural for the little fellow to come forward. So, She put the money in the little fellow's hand and put her on the ground. Without waiting for She to say anything, the little girl held the money and ran to Qiao Yuan's side, then raised her hands high and smiled sweetly, "Sister, your money." This move was fatal to both men and women. As soon as Qiao Yuan saw the little fellow's sweet smile, she subconsciously took the stack of money from her hand. Seeing that she had accepted it, the little girl ran back to She's side with her short legs and laughed, "Papa, sister will accept it. You are still the best." She smiled and pinched the little fellow's little face. After picking her up from the ground, he said to Qiao Yuan with a smile, "Let's go. It's time to close." Qiao Yuan stood there with the money in her hand. After hearing She's words, she asked in surprise, "Closed so early? It's not even 3 o'clock yet." "Let's go. It's the new year. Do you still want to work overtime?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly understood something. She nodded quickly, packed up, and left the tea house with Shi. Since the tea house was closed, Qiao Yuan naturally should go home. After she packed her luggage, Shi sent her out of Dongming Alley. There were fewer pedestrians on the street. That kind of desolation that suddenly filled the air should be the so-called New Year's smell. Qiao Yuan thanked Shi again and again. After getting in the car, she stretched out her hand and waved goodbye to the father and daughter. Watching the taxi gradually go away, the little fellow suddenly thought of the brothers. So, she sat in Shi's arms and murmured thoughtfully, "Papa, is it the new year again?" After hearing her faint murmur, she could not help but frown. The little fellow was different from other children. She did not like the new year. Because every new year, she only had Aunt Zhang by her side. After the old and the young had dinner as usual, Aunt Zhang would sit on the sofa with her in her arms and quietly watch the New Year's gala. She did not receive New Year's money, nor did she set off fireworks. She had no siblings, no friends, and no companions. Even her parents were not by her side. Even though the little fellow was still young at that time, she could feel the faint coldness. It was different from loneliness. It was a feeling that only appeared during the new year. How could a child who grew up in such a situation like the new year? As the little fellow's mood fell to the bottom, Shi's frown deepened. He thought for a moment, hugged the little fellow a little tighter, kissed her little face, and asked with a smile, "Nyan, this year, Mom and Dad are all here. Grandpa is also here, and Auntie is also here. The new year is in a few days. Dad will cook you a lively reunion dinner and take you to set off firecrackers, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow suddenly thought of something. Yes. This year was different from the past. So, she hugged Qinshi's neck and nodded heavily, with a smile on her face again. "I want New Year's money. Other children have New Year's money. I want it too. Then let Grandpa and Auntie give you red packets, okay? But Papa is the best." The little girl was so happy that she planted a kiss on Qinshi's face, making him laugh out loud. Chapter 200. February 15th, New Year's Eve. The little girl was woken up by the sound of firecrackers. Perhaps due to the cultural heritage of Shangjing City, there was no ban on setting off firecrackers in Shangjing City. Of course, there was a time limit to this. Within Shangjing's Fifth Ring Road, firecrackers could only be set off on New Year's Eve and New Year's Eve. From the second day onwards, firecrackers could only be set off during the day. It would continue until the 15th day of the first month before it was completely banned. After all, the Chinese New Year was the most important festival in the Chinese nation. It had been passed down for more than 4,000 years. If firecrackers couldn't be set off on New Year's Eve, it would feel really weird. As firecrackers were not banned, Hohai would be very lively during the Chinese New Year. A few years ago, everyone's environmental awareness was still very weak. Once it was the Chinese New Year, they wouldn't hesitate to set off firecrackers. It was also because of this that one or two pubs in Hohai would catch fire almost every year. Over the years, as the smog problem in Shangjing became more and more serious, the citizens slowly learned to restrain themselves without the need for the government's orders. They just set off a few firecrackers on New Year's Eve for fun. Today's breakfast was still porridge, but it wasn't ordinary porridge. It was Qinshi's meticulously made laba porridge. After a bowl of laba porridge, the little girl was full. The firecrackers outside were so loud that it made the little girl's heart itch. After eating breakfast, she wanted to go out to take a look, but she was stopped by Qinshi. "Nyan, it's the Chinese New Year. As a junior, you should give your elders New Year's greetings. Come, let's give Grandma a New Year's greeting over the phone. In a few days, we'll go to Chengdu and let Grandma give you a red packet, okay?" Upon hearing Qinshi's words, the little girl's eyes lit up. She jumped up and down and shouted, "Okay. I want to give Grandma a New Year's greeting. Grandma wants to give me a red packet." Qinshi sent a video call request to Auntie Zhang, and the old lady quickly picked up. Before Qinshi could speak, the little girl saw Auntie Zhang's face appear on the screen. She excitedly snatched the phone from Qinshi's hands and shouted sweetly, "Grandma, Grandma, I want to give you a New Year's greeting. New Year's greeting. Io Nyan is so sensible. Grandma is so happy." When Auntie Zhang saw her little face, she was so happy that she couldn't stop laughing. The little girl was particularly excited today. After greeting Aunt Zhang, she ran out of the West Wing with the phone in her hand. Then she raised the phone and looked around. She finally felt what it meant to celebrate the new year. She acted coquettishly with Auntie Zhang for a while until Auntie Zhang had something to do. She then reluctantly said goodbye to Auntie Zhang. Qinshi and Qinring were hanging red lanterns in the courtyard. As soon as the red lanterns were hung up, the courtyard immediately felt a bit more festive. When Qinshi was about to paste the word "Fu" on the door and window, the little fellow finally couldn't hold back and shouted that she also wanted to paste it. Thus, Qinshi brought her a small stool and let her step on it. He pasted a big "Fu" character on the window. Qin Yongyan didn't cultivate today. Early in the morning he came to the main hall. Then, he placed an incense burner on the large red sandalwood carving table and lit 3 incense sticks. When the little fellow saw Qin Yongyan, she immediately ran to Qin Yongyan according to what Qinshi had taught her. Then she excitedly shouted, "Grandpa, Grandpa, I wish you a happy new year and all the best. Good luck. Give me the red packet." After saying that, She looked at Qin Yongyan eagerly and didn't forget to reach out her little hand at the same time. Qin Yongyan was also stunned by her sudden trick. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "Oh, Grandpa will give you a red packet." Qin Yongyan patted the little fellow's little head. Then he took out a brand new 100 yuan note from his pocket and directly stuffed it into her hand. The little fellow held the brand new 100 yuan note and smiled happily. In fact, she didn't have any concept of money. Usually, she only needed to call Papa if she wanted something. The reason why she was so happy now was because of the meaning attached to this 100 yuan note. This was the first time she received New Year's money. New Year's Eve was after the beginning of spring. At this time, the temperature had obviously risen a lot. There were fewer cars during the Spring Festival, and there was no exhaust pollution. Shangjing City also changed the appearance of the past heavy smog, and for the first time, blue sky and white clouds reappeared. After lunch, the couple took the little fellow to the door and pasted couplets. Family photo every year. Good luck and fortune every year. Horizontal writing. Good luck and fortune. Just as the family of three was busy pasting couplets, a voice suddenly sounded from behind them. Ying. Qin Ruing looked back and saw a middle-aged man and woman. The woman was about 40 years old, but she was very well maintained. She could be said to have a beautiful body and still had a charm. The man looked about the same age as Qin Yongyan. Looking carefully, he looked somewhat similar to Qin Yongyan. Second uncle. Second aunt. You're back. Qin Ruing handed the couplets in her hand to Qin Shi. Then, she quickly walked in front of the two people and greeted them warmly. Second uncle Qin Yongwang and second aunt Wang Chuanju, who were her sister-in-law's parents. Second uncle, second aunt, this is my husband, Qin Shi. Qin Ruing introduced Qin Shi to the two of them. Hearing this, Qin Shi took the initiative to nod to the two of them and said with a smile, "Second uncle, second aunt, hello." Upon hearing Qin Shi's name, Wang Chuanju suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and the expression on her face couldn't help but freeze. Qin Yongwang noticed his wife's strange behavior and coughed quietly. Then he smiled at Qin Shi and said, "Hello." It seemed that this newly risen celestial was easier to interact with than they thought. Thus, second uncle started chatting with his nephew's son-in-law very politely. The little girl stood beside Qin Shi. Seeing that the adults were talking and ignoring her, she immediately pouted unhappily. This little girl was only half of Qin Shi's height. In addition, Qin Shi was too eye-catching, so Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju didn't notice her at all. It was the new year, yet she was being ignored. Of course, the little girl was unhappy. Thus, she twisted Qin Shi's arm and shouted, "I want to set off fireworks." Her voice was as clear and pleasant as a silver bell, instantly attracting everyone's attention. "Ying, your daughter?" Wang Chuanju's eyes lit up when she saw the little girl who looked like a porcelain doll. "Yes, she's called Chen Yan." Qin Ruing led the little girl away from Qin Shi and said, "Ninian, greet great aunt." "Great aunt?" The little guy called out sweetly, which immediately amused Wang Chuanju and made her laugh out loud. When a woman reached this age, she would want grandchildren more than a man. Qin Xueqing's birth characters hadn't been set in stone yet, so she could only count on Qin Ruing, and niece's daughter was also a grandniece, right? With the arrival of Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju, the courtyard finally became lively. Chapter 201. The New Year's Eve dinner was also called the reunion dinner. This was the dinner on New Year's Eve, and it was also the most important meal of the year. What the little fellow had eaten before could only be considered a family dinner, and this was also her first time eating the reunion dinner. The reunion dinner couldn't be just a few simple home-cooked dishes. Because they had to prepare the main dishes, they usually had to start preparing after noon. For such an important meal, naturally, Qin Shi was in charge of cooking. In fact, Qin Shi didn't have any special hobby when it came to cooking. The reason why he cooked every meal was because the little girl liked to eat the dishes he cooked. Today, the Sai courtyard finally became lively. Chen Shi's family of three, Qin Xueqing's family of three, and Qin Yongyan, who was the most senior. The TV in the main hall finally came into play. Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang sat in the main hall, chatting while watching TV. Wang Chuanju wanted to go to the kitchen to help Chen Shi, but Chen Shi smiled and refused. Chen Shi was busy cooking a feast for the family, and Qin Ruing accompanied the little fellow in the courtyard to set off fireworks. Qin Ruing naturally couldn't buy any firecrackers for the little child. A simple string of incense was enough to make her overjoyed. The string of incense was also known as the electric flower, also known as the fairy stick. It was mainly made of aluminum powder and potassium perchlorate, which had a low ignition point. Once it was ignited, it would emit thick smoke and sparks in all directions. This thing was of good quality and cheap, and it was very safe. Unless it was burned on the face, it basically wouldn't burn clothes or hair. It was also the most popular fireworks for children during the New Year. Last year during the New Year, the little fellow was only 3 years old. Naturally, Aunt Zhang wouldn't let her touch fireworks. As for setting off firecrackers, that was even more impossible. Therefore, when Qin Ruing lit the first firework for the little fellow immediately jumped up and down excitedly. Wasn't the firecracker that was emitting thick smoke and sparks the magic wand in little fairy's hand? The little fellow carefully took the firecracker from Qin Ruing's hand and simply waved it. After finding that there was no danger, she ran wildly in the yard. It was not dark yet, so the effect of the fireworks was not very good. However, the little guy was having a lot of fun. He waved the fireworks and circled around the yard. Perhaps it was infected by her laughter, but today, the big cat was no longer as lazy as it usually was. The little girl ran in front with the fireworks in her hand, and it meowed behind her. Who knew what they were laughing about? The first stick of fireworks burned out very quickly. Thus, the little girl ran back to Qin Ruing's side and eagerly waited for her mother to light a second one for her. Qin Xueqing and Wang Chuanju stood on the steps outside the east wing. When they saw the little fellow's adorable appearance, Wang Chuanju sighed with emotion. Yuqing, you were just as adorable when you were Nianyan's age. Hearing that, Qin Xueqing smiled and said, people grow up eventually. Yes, people grow up eventually. When they grow up, they have to start a family and have children. I don't know when I, as a mother, can become a grandmother. Look at your uncle, I'm so envious. Wang Chuanju's sudden exclamation caught Qin Xueqing off guard. After a long silence, she stiffly spat out, I'm going to practice. After saying that, she quickly ran into the east wing as if she was escaping, leaving Wang Chuanju standing outside, covering her mouth and laughing secretly. 6 adults and 1 child. Naturally, a big table had to be set up, so this New Year's Eve dinner was exceptionally sumptuous. These days, everything was about good luck. Every dish was carefully selected by Chen Shi, such as the 5 blessings, 3 sons, Tuan Tuan, Yuan Yuan, Nian Nian Yu, happy tonight, and so on. After he placed the dishes one by one on the big table in the main hall, the little girl didn't even set off the fireworks, and ran back after smelling the aroma. She knelt on the chair and stared at the table full of delicious dishes. Her saliva almost flowed out of her mouth. The little girl turned around and glanced at Qin Ru. She realized that she didn't follow her into the main hall, but turned to the east wing, so she quickly grabbed a piece of pork rib from the table. Who would have thought that her sneaky behavior would be caught red-handed by Wang Chuanju? Wang Chuanju liked this grandniece very much. When she saw the little girl's gluttonous and adorable look, she couldn't help but pat her little head. This sudden movement also gave the little fellow a huge fright. She was gnawing on the pork rib with both hands when she suddenly felt her head being touched. She was so frightened that her little hand trembled, almost throwing the pork rib away. Great aunt! The little girl turned around with the pork rib in her mouth and saw that Wang Chuanju was standing behind her. She immediately pouted her lips and greeted her. Perhaps she had a guilty conscience, or perhaps she wanted to drag her down with her. Therefore, before Wang Chuanju could say anything, the little girl got up from the chair, grabbed a piece of pork rib and handed it to her. She said sweetly, "Great aunt, eat the pork rib." Wang Chuanju looked at the pork rib in the little girl's hand, then looked at her little greasy mouth. She immediately laughed and took the pork rib from her hand. "Io, Nian Nian is so sensible. Good girl," Wang Chuanju said as she sat next to the little girl. When the little girl saw that Wang Chuanju had eaten the pork rib she handed over, her little face suddenly bloomed with joy. By the time she brought out the last dish, the lively New Year's Eve dinner had finally begun. At the same time, the Spring Festival Gala began. Just like drinking wine without a side dish, if one didn't watch the Spring Festival Gala during the New Year's Eve dinner, one would feel that something was missing. Although the Spring Festival Gala in recent years had fallen into a vicious cycle of being held every year and scolded every year, if there was really a year when the Spring Festival Gala was suddenly not held, the people of the country would probably riot. Perhaps the Spring Festival Gala wasn't as bad as imagined. The reason why it was scolded every year was because everyone had high expectations for it. As the saying goes, love is hate. The more they scolded, the more it meant that they cared about it. It was lively on the TV, and so was the Sihiyuan. Among the people at the table, except for the little girl, no one could be considered a real ordinary person. However, they were like ordinary people today. The family sat together happily, simply eating and chatting while watching the Spring Festival Gala. The little girl was soon full, but she didn't run around. Instead, she sat obediently in Wang Chuanju's arms and watched TV. She couldn't understand skits, nor could she hear the actors' lines clearly. She didn't even know the subtitles above, but whenever she heard the audience applauding on the television, the little girl would clap her little hands happily. The programs came one after another, and in a flash, it was 12 o'clock. Before the host counted down, some impatient people had already gone to the streets and set off fireworks and firecrackers one after another. 10, 9, 7, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! As soon as the voice fell, the bell rang, and then the people of the country boiled over. The crackling of firecrackers suddenly exploded, and countless fireworks bloomed in the night sky, instantly illuminating half of the night sky. The family came to the courtyard one after another, looking up at the brilliant fireworks one after another. Not to mention how excited the little girl was, even Qin Xueqing, who had always been cold, couldn't help but smile at this moment. Chapter 202. Flowing lights and colorful lights illuminated the city, and fireworks lit up the night sky. The rumbling sound of firecrackers was like thunder in summer, carrying the people's desire for the new year, and instantly turned the dark night sky into a sea of fireworks. Zhonghai was different from Shangjing. Fireworks and firecrackers were prohibited in the outer ring of Zhonghai, so this scene could not be seen during the new year. Although the fireworks show broadcast by CCTV was gorgeous and lively, it was not as vivid as standing under the night sky. The overwhelming firework rain continued to bloom in the night sky. The little fellow stared at her big eyes, opened her small mouth, and was so excited that she could not even say a word. It was really beautiful. Fireworks were easy to cool down, but the fleeting brilliance was enough to be remembered for a lifetime. Later, with the help of Qin Shi, the little fellow successfully ignited a sky rocket cannon. Her sky rocket cannon was particularly small compared to the large fireworks outside, but the little fellow was still very happy. The firework rain lasted for about 20 minutes before gradually subsiding. The reunion dinner was finished, and the fireworks were also released. This new year, she finally had a real one. The next day, when the little fellow slowly woke up, the air seemed to be filled with a faint smell of gunpowder. She sniffed her nose and suddenly smelled a strong fragrance. The little fellow opened her eyes and saw that Qin Shi was sitting on the bed with a bowl of longevity noodles in his hand, slurping and slurping. So, this unwashed and unkempt little sloppy directly threw herself into Qin Shi's arms, opened her small mouth, and wanted Qin Shi to feed her. "Papa, I want to eat too." "You get up and wash up first, then you can eat." After that, Qin Shi got up and left with the noodles in his hand, not giving in to her at all. The little fellow's small mouth twitched, and seemed to be a little unhappy. However, the temptation of delicious food was in front of her, so after hesitating for a moment, she obediently got out of the bed, and then followed Qin Shi into the bathroom. These were longevity noodles that Qin Shi had specially made using high-gluten flour. One strand was enough to fill a large bowl. Coupled with the bone broth and meat shavings that he had meticulously cooked, along with fried eggs, shiitake mushrooms, and cabbage. Just looking at it was enough to make people drool. In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to eat, Chen Shi also put the noodles in the most conspicuous position. This broth was not the soup dumplings of Wei Qian, so not only did it smell good, but it also smelled delicious when it was eaten. The longevity noodles were too delicious, so the little guy followed Chen Shi's example, making slurping sounds as he ate the noodles. In just a short while, the bowl of noodles had been eaten clean. After she finished her breakfast, Chen Shi brought the little fellow to the main hall. The first day of the new year was the day to pay New Year's greetings to the elders, so Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang were already sitting in the main hall, waiting for the little fellow's arrival. Chen Shi led the little fellow to Qin Yongyan, and then the little fellow bowed to him and said, "Grandpa, Happy New Year. I'm here to pay you New Year's greetings." "How good, child? Come, yesterday's doesn't count. Today's is the New Year's money from Grandpa." As he spoke, Qin Yongyan smiled and handed a big red packet to the little fellow. The little fellow touched the thick red packet, and suddenly grinned foolishly. Seeing this, Chen Shi patted her head gently. Then, the little fellow seemed to come back to her senses, and hurriedly said to Qin Yongyan with a big smile, "Thank you, Grandpa. Happy New Year, Grandpa." The child was still young, so she didn't understand these traditional customs and ceremonies. Naturally, it was up to her parents to guide her. After she paid her New Year greetings to Qin Yongyan, Chen Shi led her to Qin Yongwang again. Hua Xia was particular about seniority. Qin Ring was the female, and Qin Yongyan was the maternal grandfather. Qin Yongwang was Qin Ring's second uncle, so the little fellow should call him granduncle. Wang Chuanju was granduncle's wife, so she should call him grandaunt or great-aunt. Granduncle didn't sound as intimate as grandpa, so Chen Shi let the little fellow omit the word uncle in front, and just call them grandpa and grandma. "Grandpa, grandma, Happy New Year." Wang Chuanju liked the little fellow very much. When she saw the little fellow bow to her, she immediately pulled the little fellow into her arms. "Nyan is so good. Come, Grandma will give you a big red packet." "Thank you, Grandma." The little fellow held a big red packet in one hand, and her little face was so happy that flowers bloomed. Legend had it that in ancient times, there was a kind of little demon called a ghost. It had a black body and white hands, and every year on New Year's Eve, it would come out to harm people. People were afraid that ghosts would come to harm their children, so that night, they would light up the lanterns and sit without sleep. It was called guarding ghosts. Because of the homonym of sway and ghost, everyone thought that after the child received the New Year's money, they could ward off evil spirits and exorcise them, and spend the year peacefully. What the elders gave to the juniors was called ghost money. What the juniors gave to the elders was called lucky money. Generally, after paying their New Year greetings to the elders, they could go out and visit relatives. There were only so many people in the family, and they didn't have any relatives, so Wang Chuanju suggested that they take the little fellow to the temple fair to have fun together. Qin Xueqing didn't want to go, but before she could say a reason, Wang Chuanju glared at her fiercely. Looking at that attitude, it was impossible for her not to go today. Thus, the big family simply packed up and walked out of the courtyard together. There were 6 adults, 1 child and 1 cat. The whole family was really mobilized. The group of people walked out of the alley. Chen Shi went to the roadside and was about to call a taxi, but Wang Chuanju stopped him and called someone to send a car over. Then 2 red flag H7s with white and black lettering drove over from not far away. The license plate of the armed police should have the word WJ on it, but the license plate of the 2 cars was WL. Clearly, they were Wu Lian's cars. The drivers of the 2 cars had met Chen Shi before. They were the fake couple from the inspector's office. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. Xiao Wang parked the car at the entrance of the alley. After he got out of the car, he appeared very reserved and greeted them. "Mr. Chen, Deputy Director Qin, Director Wang, Director Qin, Happy New Year." Just saying these titles made Xiao Wang feel a lot of pressure. When Qin Yongwang saw this, he smiled and patted Xiao Wang's shoulder. He said very kindly, "Xiao Wang, you've worked hard. Happy New Year." "Not at all, not at all." When Xiao Wang heard his leader's concern, he laughed foolishly. The inspector's office also had a rotation system. Because the new year was very special, one day could be 3 days. On the third day of the new year, Xiao Wang could rest for more than 10 days. Moreover, the New Year's subsidies were very high. When he thought about it, he was naturally very happy. Xiao Wang and Xiao Lu left after sending the car over. Then, Chen Shi's family of 3 and his sister-in-law sat in one car, and the elders sat in another. The whole family went straight to Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Temple fairs were considered a traditional folk activity in Huaxia. Every New Year, many places in Shangjing would hold temple fairs. In fact, temple fairs were quite similar to market fairs. However, temple fairs would be interspersed with various performances, mainly to worship customs and celebrate festivals. Markets, on the other hand, were purely commercial activities. Hohai was less than 5 kilometers away from Earth Temple. Normally, it would take half an hour to drive to Earth Temple, but today, it only took a few minutes. After parking the car, the whole family walked into Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Today, Earth Temple was very lively. There were rows of red lanterns hanging outside, and there was a lion dance performance at the entrance. The people on both sides of the street gathered in circles. It was really a noisy scene. There was a sea of people, and it was a lively scene. Chapter 203. Going to the temple fair during the Spring Festival was an old custom that the people of Shangjing had followed for many years. The Earth Temple Fair was only held for 8 days, but in these short 8 days, it received more than 1 million visitors, which was really lively. Each temple fair had its own special performances, and the Earth Temple Fair performed the Qing Dynasty Palace ritual. This ritual would strictly follow the worship process of the Qianlong Emperor, and the costumes and props were also made according to the historical records, so that the people could see how the emperor worshipped the earth. The ticket for the temple fair was only 10 yuan, so compared to going to the mall and watching a movie, it was actually a very down-to-earth entertainment. Usually, a large family of men and women of all ages came together, not to buy anything, but simply to stroll around. It was very happy to squeeze together and watch the fun. 6 adults and 1 child walked with a cat. Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang walked in the front, while Qin Ruing and Qin Xueqing walked side by side. The 2 sisters hadn't talked for a long time, and now they were together whispering something. Chen Shi and Wang Chuanju were walking together, while the little fellow was lying on Wang Chuanju's shoulder, holding a windmill in her hand. Looking at the bustling scene of people jostling shoulder to shoulder, she was very happy. The family came out to stroll, so naturally, they had to chat on the road. Sure enough, after walking for a while, Wang Chuanju turned her head and looked at Chen Shi with a smile. She casually said, "You are Yingying's husband. If I call you my nephew's husband, it always feels a bit awkward. How about I call you Little Chen, what do you think?" Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled and replied, "Second aunt, you are too polite. You are an elder, so you can call me whatever you want." "Well, then don't blame me for taking advantage of my seniority and putting on the airs of an elder in front of you." "Why would I?" "Second aunt, you are joking." "Huh." The 2 of them chatted awkwardly for a while. At this time, the little fellow saw a barbecue skewers stall nearby, so she shouted to eat barbecue skewers. "Papa, I want to eat that. Meat, meat." Gluttonous baby smelled the aroma of the barbecued meat, and his saliva almost flowed out. Thus, Chen Shi went to buy a few mutton skewers for her. When Chen Shi bought the meat skewers for her and the little girl was eating them, Wang Chuanju suddenly asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Little Chen, has Ming Qing ever told you about the Wu Lian?" "Yes, I did." Chen Shi nodded. He already knew what Wang Chuanju wanted to say to him. After all, Chen Shi had heard how Xiao Wang addressed Qin Yongyan and Wang Chuanju when he was delivering the car. Secretary Qin, Director Wang. The administrative levels of Huaxia could be divided into 5 levels: national level, provincial level, departmental level, county level, and township level. The Director General was a department-level official, equivalent to an ordinary mayor of a prefecture-level city, or the head of a provincial public security department or the head of a provincial education department. From this, it could be seen that Qin Yongwang's status in Wulian was really not low. At least, he was at the level of Shintaro Abe. Celestial beings were really too eye-catching. Because of Qin Ring, Qin Shi was related to his sister-in-law's family, and their family was the backbone of the Wulian. Now, naturally, they wanted to pull Qin Shi into the Wulian. The word relationship was a very magical existence in the eyes of Westerners. Because there was no corresponding translation of this word in other languages, they specially invented an English word, guanxi, China-style relationship. A simple example could be given. Once the people of Huaxia were in trouble, the first thing they would think of was not a lawyer, but an acquaintance. Through their acquaintances and friends, they could get in touch with the government to solve the problem. The word relationship represented many meanings, and there were many usages. The word itself was a neutral word. How to use it, where to use it, and whether it was appropriate to use it. This was why it carried both positive and negative meanings. Not long ago, his sister-in-law asked Qin Shi if he was willing to join the Wulian. Today, Wang Chuanju did the same thing again. It was foreseeable that if Qin Shi still did not agree today, then Qin Yongwang, or even Qin Yongyan, might come forward to invite him to join the Wulian. If that still did not work, then Qin Ruoying would probably have to come forward and persuade him. This was probably the so-called people in Jiang who have no choice. As long as Qin Shi still had concerns in his heart, then he could not ignore some things in this world. Join the Wulian? It was still the same words, not considering. It was not that he disliked the Wulian. He simply found it troublesome. There was no free lunch in this world. The Wulian could not support a group of people without doing anything. Qin Shi was now used to being lazy. Except for his wife and children, he really did not want to run errands for others. Apart from not wanting to run errands for others, he also didn't have any desire to compete for the throne. So now, as long as he could stay by the hotbed every day and laugh with his wife as they watched the little one grow up day by day, he was already very satisfied. The little fellow did not know that her father was so unambitious. After eating a skewer, she suddenly thought of Qin Shi, so she handed one of the skewers to Qin Shi and grinned. "Papa, the skewers are delicious." "Too. Good girl, good girl." Qin Shi took the skewer from the little fellow with a smile and ate it. The little fellow turned to ask Wang Chuanju if she wanted to try, but Wang Chuanju shook her head with a smile and then wiped her mouth with a tissue. Wang Chuanju did not speak, but her attention was always on Qin Shi. Qin Shi felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by her. On second thought, instead of being remembered by the Wulian like this, it was better to take this opportunity to make it clear to them. So Qin Shi looked at Wang Chuanju and said to her directly, "The reason why you want me to join the Wulian is that you want to use me to deter other forces, right?" "Well, you can think of it that way." Wang Chuanju nodded. When she was about to say something, Qin Shi did not give her a chance to speak at all. Instead, he continued, "Then you can announce to the public that I have joined the Wulian. Anyway, I can't jump out and expose you, right?" "How can that be? You are a celestial being. If you are willing to join the Wulian, you should be treated accordingly." "I don't need any special treatment, so I won't join the Wulian." Hearing Qin Shi's resolute answer, Wang Chuanju could not help showing a trace of disappointment in her eyes, although she had been prepared for it. What a pity! However, just as Wang Chuanju was feeling disappointed, Qin Shi said with a smile, "How about this? If the Wulian has any problems that can't be solved, I can be a guest, but only once. What do you think?" Hearing this, Wang Chuanju's eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Promise?" "It's a deal." In fact, this was not a simple conversation between an aunt and a niece, but a direct conversation between a Wulian and a celestial being. The meaning of this promise was not simple. Chapter 204. The temple fair was crowded with people, and the sound of gongs and drums filled the sky. It was a festive scene. For the Huaxia people, the significance of the Spring Festival was extraordinary. The Spring Festival was also a holiday, but this long holiday was different from the Mid-Autumn Festival, the Dragon Boat Festival, and the National Day. Because only during this period, people could let go of their social identities, no longer bosses, employees, or students, but fathers, mothers, or children. Their social identities were temporarily invalid, and they had to rush home no matter where they were, just to be able to have a good new year with their families. The conversation between the two was quite pleasant. After reaching a consensus with a few simple words, Wang Chuanju stopped talking about business with Chen Shi and talked about the education of the little fellow. Chen Shi had already made up her mind to wait until September next year before sending the little guy to kindergarten for big classes. At that time, she was 5 years old. After adapting to kindergarten for a year, she was just at the age of primary school. The timing was just right. The little fellow was now very clever. When the adults spoke, she would listen to them. It didn't matter if she didn't understand. Once she heard something that she could understand, she would immediately express her opinion. For example, when she heard the sensitive word kindergarten, the little fellow immediately pouted and shouted, "I don't want to go to kindergarten." In the past, she was lonely and had no one to accompany her. Now, under the leadership of the two brothers, she had completely let go of herself, so she would rather die than go to kindergarten again. The little fellow sat in Wang Chuanju's arms and twisted her buttocks. Seeing this, Wang Chuanju comforted her with a smile. "Oh, if you say you don't want to go, then don't go. Grandma is so nice." The family strolled around Daitan Park for the whole morning. When it was time for lunch, Qin Yong Wang took everyone to know B16 at the north gate of Daitan Park. B16, Hepingli Central Street, was a high-end club, similar to the Binjiang Club, but far better than the Binjiang Club. If the Binjiang Club represented business, then no. B16 represented power. It was originally a royal garden called Jifanjiwen, which was under the jurisdiction of Daitan Park and covered an area of nearly 10,000 square meters. At first, the project approval was in the name of building office space in Daitan Park. However, after the construction, it suddenly changed and directly became a gathering place for the rich and powerful. No. B16 Club. This kind of fraudulent operation was simply not something that ordinary people could imagine. Therefore, even though Daitan Park received millions of visitors a year, few people knew that this imperial garden, which was only a wall away from Daitan Park, was actually the most high-end private club in Shangjing. Gate B16 was the highest grade gate with red paint and gold nails. There was only one staff member in the park's security uniform standing outside the gate. If it were an ordinary tourist, they would probably think that this place was not open to the public and that it was some kind of museum or research institute. Qin Yong Wang handed over a card. After the staff took a look at it, they bowed to him respectfully and opened the door. The door was only opened halfway. After Qin Shi and his family walked through the door, the staff quickly closed the door. Where the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties once reigned, the merchants of the present day gathered at the altar. Without going out of the city, one can enjoy the beauty of mountains and rivers. While staying in the bustling city, one can enjoy the beauty of the woods and springs. Standing behind the gate and looking around, one could see the palace rooms, corridor pavilions, pond pavilions, climbing corridors, rockery, and so on in the garden. The Qing dynasty relics in the garden, such as Jingguang Hall and Jinghe Hall, as well as the Shengshi Hall on the inner wall of the north side of Daitan Park, reflected a strong palace style. Now, these buildings had all become private rooms of the B16 Club. The family had just walked through the gate, and before they had time to look around, two young women in cheongsams came over. They first paid their respects to Qin Yong Wang, who was the leader of the group. Then, they led the group of people into the garden. Along the way, the feeling was like being in the palace of the Qing dynasty. The surrounding ancient buildings had been carefully renovated. All of them were gilded and painted with color, with corner tiles and eaves. When they passed by the parking lot, Chen Shi also noticed a small detail. The license plates of all the cars here were covered with cloth covers. It could be said that this was a meticulous service. The two women in cheongsams led the family around the garden for a while. After passing through the garden and crossing the stone bridge, they walked into a private room. The private room was very large, about 100 square meters. The decoration in the hall was decorated with dragons and phoenixes as the theme. It was decorated with large colored palace lanterns, bright yellow tablecloths, napkins, and chair covers. The tableware was made of porcelain and silver that imitated the Qing dynasty. Looking at this posture, it was estimated that they wanted the guests to experience the feeling of the emperor eating. After the family sat down, Qin Yongyan first looked around, then pointed at Qin Yongwang and said jokingly, "You, corrupt official, a very corrupt official." Hearing this, Qin Yongwang hurriedly waved his hand and smiled. "Don't accuse me of being a corrupt official. This membership card was given to me by the boss here. It's rare for me to come here. You see, it's New Year. Our family should have a good meal, right? Oh, then it's thanks to you." The two of them joked a few words. In fact, these materialistic things were of no importance to the few people present. The only reason they came here to eat was because of the novelty. In this kind of place, what they ate was not the taste, but the environment and service. Not to mention the environment, this place was definitely the best in the country. As for the service level, it could be seen from the number of people. There was a woman in a cheongsam standing in each of the four corners of the private room, and there were 2 waiters. There were only 7 people in Qinshi's family, but there were 6 waiters here. Moreover, it was the Spring Festival. The dishes were served very quickly. In less than 20 minutes, the table was full of dishes. Wang Chuanju served the little fellow and tasted a few of them. She pursed her lips and carefully recalled the taste. Then she commented, "It's not as good as what Papa cooked." Nonsense, her father was in the semi-god realm. Cooking was like shooting a rocket. The amount of salt he put in had to be precise to 2 decimal places. How could the dishes not be delicious? The quality of the food here was so high, so the taste would naturally not be bad. The little fellow was really making things difficult for others. The whole family laughed happily as they ate. Qin Yongyan didn't like outsiders watching him while he was eating, so he asked the waiters to leave. However, not long after the waiters left, there was a sudden knock on the door of the private room. After Qin Yongyan asked to come in, a man who looked about 30 or 40 years old came in. The man was holding a glass of red wine. After briefly glancing at the people in the room, he went directly to Qin Yongwang and said to him with a smile, "Secretary Qin, Director Wang, I just heard that you were eating here, so I wanted to come and give you a New Year's greeting. Do you mind if I come uninvited?" After hearing the man's words, Qin Yongwang stood up and replied with a smile, "Mr. Wu, you're welcome." As he spoke, he picked up his glass and gently clinked it with Mr. Wu's. Chapter 205. Young Master Wu's full name was Wu Hui, and he ran some unknown businesses in Shangjing. He was involved in many industries, such as finance, real estate, energy, film, internet, and so on. Anything that could make money, young Master Wu definitely had a share in it. Wu Hui's business was very big, but he usually didn't run it under his own name, so there were very few people who really knew his name. For example, business moguls like Ning Zhonghua and Zhou Haisheng who started from scratch. Although they were rich, that was all there was to it. In China, money was not the only thing that mattered. The Chinese language was broad and profound, and the term young master in ancient times generally referred to scholars or young men from wealthy families. In the past, this term was a form of respect and a compliment. But in modern times, the term young master seemed to have a derogatory connotation, just like the 4 young masters of the capital. Just like the term emperor, anyone could joke and say that they were the emperor, but in the past, it would be a crime punishable by death. The so-called 4 young masters of the capital, in the eyes of people like Wu Hui, were actually similar to clowns, insects that could be trampled to death with 1 foot. How could a few nouveau riches be worthy of the title of 4 young masters of the capital? Of course, disdain was disdain, but Wu Hui wouldn't bother with ordinary people for no reason. Because they didn't have contact with them, many people's understanding of the second generation of rich and powerful people might be one-sided, thinking that they were all mud that couldn't support the wall. As the saying goes, dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to sons that know how to dig holes. In reality, most of the second generation were very outstanding. After all, their parents were very outstanding, and the education that these second generation received from a young age was far better than ordinary people, so in terms of personal quality, cultivation, and knowledge, the outstanding second generation could be said to be dragons and phoenixes among men. As for the nouveau riches like Li Tian'er and Yao Jiasin, who caused a huge sensation in society, they could only be compared to ordinary people. If they were placed in the real circle of second generation, this kind of trash wouldn't even have the qualifications to carry shoes for others. Wu Hui had shares in B16, so the waiter told him about the arrival of Qin Yongwang's family. Qin Yongwang took a glass of juice and clinked it with Wu Hui, then introduced his family to him one by one. When it was Qin Shi's turn, before Qin Yongwang could introduce him, Wu Hui laughed and said, "This? Could you be Mr. Qin?" Hearing this, Qin Shi stood up with the juice in his hand. He nodded and said, "Hello. Hello, hello. I've heard a lot about Mr. Qin. I didn't expect Mr. Qin to be so much younger than I thought." After confirming Qin Shi's identity, Wu Hui immediately lowered his posture. When they clinked glasses, he deliberately lowered his glass to give Qin Shi enough face. However, this seemingly polite action of his attracted Qin Yongwang's attention. Although it was said that the Hua Hua sedan chair was always carried by people, and the brothers on the Imperial Golden List were ranked first. But no matter what, Wu Hui was still a third generation of the Red Army, and his age was also a few years older than Qin Shi. Therefore, according to common sense, there was no reason for him to lower his status in front of Qin Shi. Something was strange. Wu Hui politely toasted everyone in the room. Even the little girl raised her glass of juice and clinked glasses with him. Then, Qin Yongwang invited him to take a seat. After he sat down, Qin Yongwang did not beat around the bush. He directly asked the question in his heart, "Mr. Wu, today is the first day of the new year. Why aren't you celebrating the new year with your family? Why are you here instead?" Hearing this, Wu Hui did not hide it. He smiled and said, "Director Qin, it's not a coincidence that I met your family here today. In fact, I came here after I received the news. For Mr. Qin." As soon as he said this, Qin Shi suddenly became the focus of the room. Even Qin Ruoying was a little confused. When did Qin Shi get in touch with Wu Hui, who represented the new generation of power in Huaxia? For me, not only was Qin Ruoying confused, but even Qin Shi himself was confused. Therefore, he immediately asked, "Mr. Wu, this is the first time we've met. I'm a little confused by your words." "Mr. Qin, it's true that this is the first time we've met, but I've been fascinated by you for a long time." Wu Hui looked at Qin Shi meaningfully and finally said the purpose of his visit. "Actually, I came here today to ask for a favor. Not only am I representing myself, but I'm also representing my father." "Go ahead." After hearing Wu Hui's serious words, Qin Shi did not feel anything, so he casually nodded. However, the more Qin Yongwang listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. The expression on his face could not help but become more serious. At this time, the smile on Wu Hui's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Qin Shi and said solemnly, "My grandfather's physical condition is getting worse and worse. I heard that Mr. Chen has the ability to understand the world, so I took the liberty to come here today to disturb you. I only hope that Mr. Chen can save my grandfather." After that, Wu Hui got up and bowed respectfully to Qin Shi. The reason why he was so polite in front of Qin Shi was actually not because of Qin Shi's identity as a celestial being, but because the king of hell was worried. How many powerful second generations were there in Huaxia? After careful calculation, it was actually not far from the truth. There were 7 senior officials, 72 deputy national officials, at least 270 senior officials, and at least 1,700 deputy ministers. These people formed the pyramid of power in Huaxia. Only their children could be called the real second generation of power. A civilian like Li Danjiang, who enjoyed the treatment of a major general through singing, was nothing in front of these leaders with real power. Wu Hui was also one of the most outstanding people among the second generation of the Quan family. However, the reason why the Wu family was so prosperous now was not because of his father, but because of his grandfather. Although the old man had been retired for a long time, his connections were still there. As long as old man Wu did not pass away, the Wu family would be able to live in Shangjing and even Huaxia for a day longer. Wu Hui's father was called Wu Ying. He was 62 years old this year, and happened to be stuck at a very awkward time. Here, it had to be mentioned that Hua Xia's chaotic retirement system had to be mentioned. When the new party congress was held, only people under the age of 67, including 67, were eligible to become members of the new Politburo. And those over the age of 67, regardless of their ability or political achievements, were all treated as retirees. If anything happened to old man Wu in these 2 years, then Wu Ying was likely to stay in his current position until he retired. Perhaps he would be promoted again, but what awaited Wu Ying would be the vice chairman of the National People's Congress, or other similar positions. They were all at the deputy national level, but in reality, these positions were not as good as the senior officials with real power. Although they were promoted, they were actually demoted. Even if they were promoted, they would only retire to the second level. Not to mention Wu Ying, even Wu Hui could not accept this situation. If Wu Ying could not pass this hurdle, then the Wu family's current glory would disappear with the old man's passing. Chapter 206. Yama's Sorrow, Yama's Sorrow. If Yama wanted someone to die at midnight, he could keep them alive until dawn. Legend had it that a single pill of Yama's Sorrow could bring the dead back to life. It had the miraculous effect of reviving the dead. Although Wu Hui also felt that this was an exaggeration, he was now like a drowning man desperately trying to grasp at the last straw. Therefore, he roughly explained the Wu family's current predicament at the dinner table. There was nothing shameful about this. As long as she could let Elder Wu live for 2 more years and hold on until Wu Ying successfully crossed the threshold, then the Wu family would be able to maintain their current status. Once she agreed, then this favor would really be a life-saving grace for the Wu family. Wu Hui was very smart, so he didn't mention anything about remuneration from beginning to end. Instead, he kept pleading very sincerely, "Mr. Chen, please save my grandfather." The Wu family will always remember this great kindness in their hearts. It was the new year, and the family could still encounter this kind of thing. She pondered for a moment, then frowned and asked, "How old is your grandfather today?" 84. He doesn't have any serious illness, right? Only old illnesses like high blood pressure and gout. It's probably because he injured his roots on the battlefield. The old man's old, and his body can't take it anymore. Recently, his mental state has been getting worse and worse, and he doesn't even have the energy to get out of bed, so Wu Hui didn't finish his words. However, the meaning behind his words was very simple. Although the old man wasn't seriously ill, he was nearing the end of his life. Death was an illness that couldn't be cured. After all, a person's life was limited. When a person faced a natural death, they would always be aware of it beforehand. Therefore, many old people would call their children home before they died, and let their children wash and change their clothes for them. After taking one last look at their children and grandchildren, they would close their eyes and pass away peacefully and naturally as if they were asleep. They had never suffered the torture of illness before, and they would pass away peacefully in their sleep. Therefore, to the people of Hua Xia, dying of old age was a blessing, a great blessing. After all, Elder Wu was an old man who had walked through the war years. He had experienced ups and downs and enjoyed the prosperity of the world. Now that he was nearing the end of his life, it should have been a joyous occasion. Unfortunately, this was not the right time. If the old man passed away at such a critical moment, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the Wu family. It was a nightmare. Just a little more. Once the old man passed away, how could Wu Ying advance further? What Hua Xia did not lack the least was talent. There were plenty of competitors who had the same qualifications and abilities as Wu Ying, and some were even older than him. As the saying goes, the tea cools down when the person is gone. These things were top secret. The fact that Wu Hui was willing to reveal the old master's condition in front of everyone meant that he saw Qin Shi as his last hope. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju glanced at each other before they started to eat. This was a very important matter, so the moment Wu Hui finished speaking, Qin Yongwang glanced at Wang Chuanju and started to eat silently. Qin Yongyan was dressed in white. Qin Ring didn't understand the situation, and Qin Xueqing was completely uninterested. Everyone was waiting for Qin Shi's answer. The only one who could laugh at such a time was obviously the little girl. She picked up her chopsticks, clumsily picked up a piece of fatty meat, and handed it to Qin Shi. Then she said seriously, "Papa, I'll treat you to it." The little girl didn't eat fatty meat because she felt that it was too stuffy, so she hated fatty meat very much. She didn't eat it, but she could give it to Papa. The little brat had learned how to be naughty. Qin Shi turned to look at her, reached out and rubbed her head. Then he opened his mouth and swallowed the fatty meat on her chopsticks. After seeing Qin Shi swallow the fatty meat, the little girl clapped her hands and giggled, "Papa is so awesome." Her clear childish voice sounded in the private room, which was particularly ear-piercing. Qin Shi glanced at Wu Hui thoughtfully, but saw that there was no change on his face, which made Qin Shi think more highly of him. Therefore, he didn't beat around the bush. After motioning the little girl to be quiet, Qin Shi turned to look at Wu Hui and asked very calmly, "Mr. Wu, I don't know if you have heard of the saying, life and death are predestined and can't be changed." Hearing this, Wu Hui's face changed greatly. In a moment of excitement, he even accidentally knocked over the wine glass on the table. Life and death are predestined and can't be changed. This sentence was said by Zhuge Liang when Wei Yan stepped on his life lamp. How could Wu Hui not know? Zhuge Liang went out of Mount Qi 6 times and exhausted his efforts. Finally, he set up the 7-star life-extending lamp in Wuzhong Plain in an attempt to change his fate. However, because Wei Yan accidentally knocked over his life lamp, all his efforts were wasted, and he died with regret. The reason why Sima Yi had the last laugh was not because he was stronger than Zhuge Liang, but because he had lived for a long time. He dragged Zhuge Liang to death and exhausted 3 generations of the Wei Kingdom's monarchs. All the enemies who could compete with him were dead. Naturally, the Sima family could achieve great things. In terms of survival ability, Sima Yi was the best in the world. Old Master Wu was not Sima Yi, but Zhuge Liang, so Wu Hui stood in place and couldn't help but clench his fists. In the end, he was still a little unwilling, so he asked in a slightly trembling voice, "Mr. Qin, you really don't have a way?" 1 year, Grandpa only needs 1 year. Qin Shi shook his head slightly, then took out 3 energy pills from his bag and put them on the round table. After slowly turning the energy pills in front of Wu Hui, Qin Shi said calmly, "This is the legendary Yama's Cho. In fact, you should know that the Jianghu's rumors can't be trusted. After all, this medicine is not the life fruit of the grand deity Zhenyuan. It can cure diseases, but it can't change fate. You can take it back and let the old man try it. It should improve his mental state, but I still say the same thing, life and death are predestined and can't be changed. Young Master Wu, I'm very sorry." Wu Hui stared at the 3 pills in front of him in a daze. This was the Yama's Cho he had been dreaming of, but Qin Shi's words completely extinguished the hope in his heart. After spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, Wu Hui used a tissue to carefully wrap up the 3 pills. Then he solemnly bowed to Qin Shi and said, "Thank you, Mr. Qin." After that, he turned and left the room without even saying goodbye to Qin Yonglong. Perhaps it was because they empathized with Wu Hui's feelings, so the atmosphere in the room became a little strange. After Wu Hui left, Qin Ruoing looked at Qin Shi thoughtfully, then asked in a low voice, "You really don't have a way?" Hearing that, Qin Shi smiled and shook his head, not answering her question. Zhuge Liang wasn't the only one who knew how to use the 7-star life-prolonging lamp. Zhuge Liang failed, but another person succeeded. That person was Liu Bowen. Zhuge Liang divided the world, Liu Bowen unified the country. Liu Bowen was the #1 strategist of the Great Ming Dynasty. He followed Zhu Yuanzhang to wipe out the warlords and expel the Tatars. After many years of fighting, he realized that his life was coming to an end, so he used the 7-star life-prolonging lamp to extend his life by 12 years. Only then was he able to help Zhu Yuanzhang unify the world and recover the Han people's country. To put it bluntly, it wasn't that Qin Shi didn't have a way, but that he didn't want to. There were too many implications, and it couldn't be explained in a few words. The title of Yama's Cho was made by Ning Zhonghua, so today, it was up to him to personally destroy this title. The previous chapter has been censored, and I don't know when it will be released. Let's leave it at that. Friends who haven't read it can wait a few days, when the editor goes to work. I won't write about these sensitive topics in the future. Chapter 207. Huaxia was too big, and there were too many people. What happened to Wu Hui's family was not uncommon in the officialdom. The Great Han Empire and the Great Tang Empire, which used to be extremely powerful, would also collapse one day. Compared to them, what was the Wu family? Life and death were fated and could not be changed. As the supreme ruler of the world, the emperors of each dynasty held the power of life and death in their hands. They sat on 3,000 beauties, ate all kinds of delicacies, and wore all kinds of silk. But in the end, they all pursued the same thing, immortality. If Chen Shi promised Wu Hui today to extend old Master Wu's life and help the Wu family out of this predicament, then the threshold of the courtyard would probably be trampled flat by people who came to ask for medicine. Wu Hui's sudden departure seemed to have diluted the festive atmosphere. It was supposed to be a happy time for family reunion, but now everyone was silent. Qin Yongyan first looked at Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanjiu, then turned to look at Chen Shi. Only then did he pick up the juice and smiled at the little girl. "Nian Nian, Grandpa taught you a poem. Do you want to learn it?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and asked, "Poem? Grandpa, what is a poem?" "It's the same as a poem. Have you recited a poem?" "Yes. Papa taught me to recite poems before." When it came to poems, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Perhaps she wanted to show off, so before Qin Yongyan said anything, she took the initiative to recite it. Goose, 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 curving its neck to the sky. White feathers floating on the green water, red palms plucking the clear waves. This was what Chen Shi taught her in Kangju district. He did not expect her to remember and recite it so fluently. Her performance won her applause from the audience. The family laughed and praised the little girl for being smart, which made her feel a little embarrassed. Seeing his daughter so smart, Chen Shi also felt proud, so he could not help but reach out and pinch her little face, which made the little girl pout on the spot. "Papa, you're so annoying." Even the little one knows how to be shy. With her interruption, the atmosphere in the private room became much livelier. At this time, Qin Yongyan chuckled and said, "Nian, lyrics are like poems. Do you want to learn?" The little guy's performance in reciting the poem had won the cheers of the entire hall. This made her extremely proud, so she immediately nodded and replied, "Yes." "All right, then listen carefully." Qin Yongyan stood up and his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had come to the riverside and was looking at the torrential river. He passionately chanted, "My name is Qin Yongyan. The rolling Yangtze River flows eastward, and the waves wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure are gone in the blink of an eye. The green hills are still there, and the sunset is still red." White-haired fisherman and woodcutter on the riverside, accustomed to the autumn moon and spring breeze. A pot of turbid wine was a happy reunion. So many things from the past to the present are just jokes. So many things from the past to the present were all jokes. After hearing this, Qin Yongwang couldn't help but tilt his head and look at Wang Chuanjiu. He instantly understood what Qin Yongyan wanted to express. He didn't really want to teach the little guy to recite the poem. He just wanted to use this as an excuse to express his opinion on this matter. Compared to Qin Yongyan and Chen Shi's leisurely and complacent appearance, the couple's performance was indeed a bit too utilitarian. They were both martial artists, but because they had been in the Wu Lian government for a long time, they naturally couldn't avoid being contaminated with some official habits. However, this point was extremely detrimental to their martial arts cultivation. Qin Yongyan was giving them pointers. Everyone was smart, so there was no need to say anything. Just a little pointers would be enough. This song, Riverside Immortal, was the theme song of the 1994 version of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The little guy still hadn't watched The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so this song was a bit too difficult for her to pronounce. Thus, after she rolled around for a long time, she found that she couldn't even remember the first line. Immediately, she pouted unhappily and shrank back into the chair. "I can't recite it. I'm not going to recite it." Chen Shi was afraid that she would be deeply affected, so he quickly smiled and comforted her. Nyan, be good. It's not your fault that you can't recite it. Don't be discouraged. This song is really too difficult. When you go to school in the future, you will naturally recite it. Hearing this, the little guy still looked unhappy. She turned her head and didn't talk to Chen Shi. Her cute little appearance immediately made everyone laugh. Having a little one at home was like having a treasure. The little guy was now the happy fruit of the family. Her every frown and smile could affect the mood of the whole family. After lunch, the family left B16 and then drove to the bird's nest, ready to take the little guy there to ski. The bird's nest was happy during the ice and snow season. In fact, it was similar to the Shikahai ice rink, except that one was a frozen lake that turned into an ice rink, and the other was a snowy gymnasium that turned into a ski rink. There were only a few entertainment projects. The bird's nest had it, and the Shikahai also had it, but the little guy still had a lot of fun. She was now enjoying the supreme treatment. The whole family revolved around her. If she wanted something, she only needed to open her mouth. Naturally, her father or grandmother would run errands for her. This little guy was really spoiled to the sky. This spring festival was quite fulfilling. After the first day of the new year, in the next few days, the whole family drove around the capital to play. The whole family was mobilized just to make her have more fun. When the two brothers came back, they didn't know how the little guy would show off to them. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 5th day of the new year. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju were the senior cadres of the Wulian. After a spring festival, there were still a lot of things waiting for them to go back to deal with. Therefore, they could only say goodbye to the little guy with slight regret. After a few days of getting along, the little guy had already recognized Wang Chuanju as her great-uncle and grandmother. Now that she heard that she was leaving, she immediately showed a reluctant look. Just as the little guy and Wang Chuanju were lovey-dovey and unwilling to part, Qin Xueqing suddenly found Chen Shi. The set of skills you taught me, can I teach my parents? Although the sister-in-law's cultivation time was short, she had already tasted the sweetness of it. No matter what, she was still a daughter. Naturally, she wanted to show filial piety to her parents as soon as she had something good. Hearing this, Chen Shi nodded. No matter what, they were still a family. Naturally, he couldn't be stingy. However, this set of skills was after all an immortal cultivator skill. If it was spread out, it would definitely cause a huge impact on the existing cultivation system on Earth. It might even affect the existing social order on Earth. Such an outcome was obviously not what Chen Shi wanted to see. Therefore, he could only use hints to warn his sister-in-law to keep it a secret. After Grandpa and Grandma left, the little guy was a little sad. However, Chen Shi's words immediately made her eyes light up. Chapter 208. Go to Chengdu to see Grandma. This suggestion was very tempting for the little girl. The little girl had a good impression of Chengdu. Although she didn't like Kai Shu Qin, her grandma was there. Therefore, after hearing Chen Shi's suggestion, the little girl immediately jumped up and shouted excitedly, I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. The family of 3 was standing outside the courtyard to send Qin Yongwang and his wife off. The little girl's sudden shout even startled Qin Yongwang and his wife, who had already walked to the entrance of the alley. While they were sending their grandparents off, she was already shouting about looking for Grandma. This was the reason why Chen Shi didn't often mention Aunt Zhang. The little girl always listened to the wind and rain. Once she had an idea, she couldn't take it back. After sending Qin Yongwang and his wife off, Chen Shi and his family returned to the West Wing and began to pack their luggage. During this time, Chen Shi even asked his sister-in-law if she wanted to go to Chengdu with them, but his sister-in-law decisively refused. The family's general mobilization during the Spring Festival had already delayed a lot of time. Now that they were finally free, she naturally had to work overtime to cultivate and rush back. Therefore, after the family of 3 simply packed, Chen Shi booked the plane tickets online. Shangjing to Chengdu. In 2 days, it would be the peak period to return to the city. Shangjing to Chengdu would only cost a few hundred yuan, but Chengdu to Shangjing would cost 3 to 4,000 yuan. It might even be impossible to buy a ticket. This was the right time to go to Chengdu. After booking the plane tickets, Chen Shi suddenly thought of something. He quickly opened WeChat and sent a video call request to Aunt Zhang. He didn't know how the old lady spent the spring festival. If the family of 3 rushed over excitedly and found that Aunt Zhang wasn't in Chengdu, then it would be a wasted trip. As expected, Chen Shi sent 2 video calls, but no one answered. Therefore, he had to call Aunt Zhang. Beep, beep, the phone rang for a long time. When Chen Shi was about to give up, the phone finally connected. Hello, is this Brother Chen? It was not Auntie Zhang's voice, but Xie Pinglin's. He was slightly older than Chen Shi, but after the previous incident, Xie Pinglin had indeed learned a lot, so he treated Chen Shi as an elder brother. Xie Pinglin called him Brother Chen out of respect from the bottom of his heart. Yes, it's me. Where's Auntie Zhang? Why didn't she answer the phone? My mother is sick and hospitalized. Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but frown. What a joke. Auntie Zhang had already taken his elixir before she left Zhonghai, and the elixir she gave Ning Zhongguo wasn't even the simplified version. It wasn't that Chen Shi wanted to boast, but this pill could make Auntie Zhang immune to all kinds of diseases. It wouldn't be a problem for her to live a long life. Now, Xie Pinglin was telling him that Aunt Zhang was hospitalized. Therefore, Chen Shi's first reaction was to say, "You kidding? Are you King kidding me? What's going on? My mother suddenly fainted the day before yesterday. We sent her to the hospital, and the doctor said that it was very likely that she fainted due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. She needs to be hospitalized for a while to be sure. Is it serious? It shouldn't be a big problem. After she woke up, she just felt very tired, so she had to sleep for a long time every day. Which hospital are you in?" Huaxi, okay, I'll call you when I arrive. Keep the phone connected. Huh? You're coming to Chengdu? Xie Pinglin was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly said, My mother should be fine. Brother Chen, you don't have to make a special trip. Xie Pinglin wanted to say a few polite words to Chen Shi and tell him not to worry, but Chen Shi hung up the phone. Then, Chen Shi briefly told Qin Ruing about Auntie Zhang's situation. Qin Ruing didn't know the seriousness of the matter, but when she heard that Auntie Zhang was hospitalized, she was still very nervous, so she quickly carried the little girl and followed Chen Shi to the airport in a taxi. It only took 3 hours from Shangjing to Chengdu. When they got off the plane, it was not even 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The family of 3 took a taxi and went straight to Huaxi Hospital. Many shops along the way were not open, and there were only a few scattered cars on the viaduct. Right now, Chengdu looked like an empty city. However, in fact, according to the comprehensive calculation of the National Tourism Administration's data center, the number of tourists received by Sichuan and Chongqing during the Spring Festival this year was the second highest in the country, second only to Yuezhou. As long as it was a holiday, tourist attractions would be full. Places like Chuanxi Road, Jinli, Wuhou Temple, and Winshu Courtyard were so crowded that the roads were closed. Although there was a place in Chengdu that was not a tourist attraction, it was more lively than a tourist attraction. Moreover, 365 days a year, it was lively every day as if it was the new year. This was Huaxi Hospital. After getting out of the taxi and seeing the dense crowd in front of him, Chen Shi let the little girl ride on his shoulder while he held Qin Ruing's hand and squeezed into the hospital. With so many patients, the beds were naturally very tight. When Chen Shi found Aunt Zhang's bed according to the address given by Xie Pinglin, he was so angry that he frowned. Aunt Zhang's bed was in the aisle. When he left, he had left a total of 1.8 million yuan in cash for Xie Pinglin. In the end, this was how Xie Pinglin treated Aunt Zhang. Xie Pinglin was serving the old lady water, so he did not notice Chen Shi and his family's arrival. The old lady's mental state was indeed very bad now. Her face was slightly sallow, and there was not much color on her lips. When Qin Ruing saw her sick appearance, her eyes could not help but turn red. Aunt Zhang drank a mouthful of water. Just as she was about to lie down and continue to rest, she saw the family of 3 standing not far away. She blinked, thinking that she had seen wrongly. Seeing that, Qin Ruing quickly went forward and sat by Aunt Zhang's bed, holding her hand tightly. Looking at Aunt Zhang, who was half lying in front of her, Qin Ruing could not help but feel a lump in her throat. She could not help but cry immediately. She had not seen Aunt Zhang for many years. Unexpectedly, the old lady was already lying on the bed when they met again. How could Qin Ruing not feel sad? Aunt Zhang had watched her grow up, and she had also watched Aunt Zhang grow old day by day. Aunt, what's wrong with you? Why are you so sick? Silly child, I'm fine. My body is fine. Look at you, why are you crying? Isn't it inauspicious? Come, wipe your tears. Aunt Zhang smiled as she pulled a tissue from the bedside and handed it to Qin Ruing. After Qin Ruing wiped her tears, Aunt Zhang patted the back of her hand, indicating that she did not need to worry. Then, Aunt Zhang turned her head to look at the little girl in Qin Shi's arms. Good granddaughter, come to grandma. The little girl was sitting in Qin Shi's arms, pouting as she looked at Aunt Zhang, who was lying on the bed. Chapter 209. Although the smell of disinfectant was strong in the corridor of the hospital, there seemed to be an irrepressible stench in the air. The corridor was bustling with activity. Although there were many people, everyone was trying their best not to make too much noise. After all, it was an unlucky place. Sadness and sadness were the main theme here. The back of the bed could be raised. Instead of saying that Aunt Zhang was lying on the bed, it was better to say that she was leaning on the bed. When the little girl saw her grandmother's sickly appearance, she immediately lay in her grandmother's arms and cried out sadly. When Aunt Zhang saw this, she immediately patted her little head and comforted her very kindly. Oh, my good granddaughter, what's wrong? Who bullied you? Tell Grandma, Grandma will stand up for you. Hearing this, the little girl's eyes turned red. She said with an aggrieved face, Grandma, don't be sick. I don't want you to be sick. All right, Grandma is not sick. Aunt Zhang took out a tissue and wiped the little girl's face. Then she pinched her little face and comforted her. Good girl, don't cry. Look at how many people are here, and you're still crying here. Don't you feel embarrassed? The little girl turned her head and glanced at both sides of the corridor. When she saw that many people were looking at them, she immediately sniffled a little embarrassedly. Then she threw herself into Aunt Zhang's arms and hugged her tightly. Just when the little girl and Aunt Zhang were being lovey-dovey, Chen Shi came to Xie Pinglin's side. He patted Xie Pinglin's shoulder and walked to the side. When Xie Pinglin came over, Chen Shi asked directly, What did the doctor say? They did a Doppler examination in the morning. The report is just out. I've asked the doctor. The doctor said that acute cerebral blood supply is very common in the elderly. It's not a big problem. She just needs to pay more attention to her diet and rest. Is that so? Chen Shi pondered for a while. Then he looked at Aunt Zhang's bed and asked rather unhappily, Are there no more beds in the hospital? Why did they arrange for her to be in the corridor? There were several types of beds in the hospital. The most common ones were a 7-person room, a 3-person room, a double room, and a single room. As for the aisles, usually only patients with limited beds or financial difficulties would stay there. In the past 2 years, the housing prices in Chengdu had risen particularly fast. The prices in the Third Ring Road had exceeded 10,000, and the prices in the South Gate were as high as 20 to 30,000. However, Chen Shi had not given Xie Pinglin 1 million, but 1,800,000. The money was more than enough to buy a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room. Moreover, Xie Pinglin and his wife had some savings. If Xie Pinglin really wanted to mistreat his own mother, Chen Shi could only apologize to him. However, the real situation was not what Chen Shi imagined. When Xie Pinglin heard Chen Shi's question, he couldn't help but look at his expression. After realizing that Chen Shi seemed to be a little angry, Xie Pinglin quickly explained, It's not that there aren't enough beds, and it's not that I don't want to spend money. It's just that my mom doesn't agree. Originally, I arranged a double room for her, but after my mom woke up, she felt that there was nothing wrong with her. She was afraid that it would be a waste, so she insisted that the nurse move her to the aisles. She wouldn't listen no matter how I persuaded her. Since she didn't want to, I had no choice but to let it be, Speaking of this, Xie Pinglin was also quite depressed. In fact, the hospital bed fee was not too expensive. There were clearly beds in the ward, but as a son he let his mother stay in the aisles. Therefore, he had been looked down upon by many people these 2 days. Then it seems that I've misunderstood you. I'm sorry. It's okay. Brother Chen, you're treating me like an outsider. Xie Pinglin was still the same as before, not good with words. Therefore, Chen Shi changed the topic and asked about their recent situation. Their child was still young. Once Aunt Zhang fell ill, there was no one to take care of the child. A place like the hospital was obviously not suitable for children to stay for long, so Kai Shuqin was now at home taking care of the child all day. The two of them chatted for a while. Seeing that Aunt Zhang had coaxed the little guy, Chen Shi went to Aunt Zhang's bedside and took her pulse. Aunt Zhang's current situation was indeed similar to what the doctor said. There was no major problem, but her pulse was weak, and her qi and blood were insufficient. She would be fine after a good rest, a regular diet, and more exercise. However, it was precisely because of this that Chen Shi felt a little strange. Could it be that his energy cultivation pill was really a fake and inferior product? How long had it been since Aunt Zhang returned to Chengdu? How did this happen? Thinking of this, Chen Shi could not help but ask doubtfully, once acute cerebral blood supply deficiency occurs, it will come very suddenly. However, there should be some signs before the onset, such as blurred vision, tinnitus, nausea, cold sweat, and weakness in the limbs. You didn't feel any of these before? Hearing this, Aunt Zhang shook her head and smiled. No, I'm old. It's normal for some problems to suddenly appear. Previously, we were celebrating the new year at our hometown. I guess it's because we haven't been back for a long time. After I got there, I felt a little unacclimatized and couldn't sleep well. Other than sleep, there were no other problems. The symptoms you mentioned just now, there were none at all. There were no signs. Hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Chen Shi was instantly puzzled. It sounded like everything was normal. Thus, after pondering for a while, he continued to ask, "Where is your hometown?" Rain City. Although Rain City was a prefecture-level city, due to geographical reasons, its economic development was very slow. It could not even compare to some of the coastal towns. However, such a small and unremarkable city had once been glorious. During the Republic of China, Rain City was the provincial capital of Xikang Province. Its status was comparable to the current Chengdu. In 1955, the first session of the National People's Congress officially proposed to abolish Xikang Province. Thus, Rain City lost its status as a provincial capital. This place was surrounded by mountains on all sides. The terrain was narrow and it was inconvenient to travel. After Xikang Province was abolished, Rain City's development was greatly affected. It was gradually reduced to an 18th-tier small city. Later on, Rain City finally walked into the eyes of the entire nation again. However, it was because of the 4.20 earthquake in 2013. Rain City? Chen Shi thoughtfully repeated the name of this place. Suddenly, a question appeared in his mind. Could it be that there was something wrong with that place? Aunt Zhang was still lying on the hospital bed, so Chen Shi did not ask much. The most important thing now was to let the old lady rest well and recover her body. Thus, after feeding Aunt Zhang a simplified version of the energy-enhancing pill, Chen Shi went to Huaxi Gold Card Medical Center to apply for a gold card for her in case such a situation happened again. In this day and age, money could make the devil turn millstones, let alone a hospital. The Gold Card Medical Center was located in Huaxi Hospital's headquarters. Ordinary members were 58,000 and advanced members were 200,000. When they entered the hospital, they could enjoy concierge reception, personal care, 5-star hotel rooms, on-site services, and 24 hours of call. After all, Chen Shi could not stay in Chengdu for a long period of time. Aunt Zhang was old, so it was better to be prepared for her advanced membership. Chapter 210. Insufficient blood supply to the brain was mostly due to cerebral arteriosclerosis. As people aged, their organ functions would deteriorate, leading to a decline in hematopoietic ability. In addition, The formation of microthrombosis would block the blood vessels and reduce the blood flow. As a result, the brain would have insufficient blood supply to the brain. According to statistics, 80% of people over the age of 80 had insufficient blood supply to the brain. 70% of people over the age of 60 would have some degree of insufficient blood supply to the brain. Since it was caused by the blockage of blood vessels and the decline in hematopoietic ability, the effect of the meridian unblocking pill was obviously much better than the energy pill. Therefore, Qin Shi refined a meridian unblocking pill for Aunt Zhang overnight. After the old lady took it, her complexion improved significantly. Aunt Zhang had come from a hard life and wanted to save every needle and thread. Although she knew that Qin Shi was rich now, she still insisted on not wasting money. After staying in the Gold Card Center for one night, she insisted on leaving the hospital and going home. When they went home, Xie Pinglin took a taxi alone and walked in front. The family of 3 and Aunt Zhang sat in another car. This finally gave Aunt Zhang a chance to lecture him. The ward in the Gold Card Center was obviously very high class. Staying for one night was similar to staying in a hotel. How wasteful was that? She was not that delicate. How was staying in the aisle shameful? She was not in good spirits yesterday, so when Qin Shi forced her to be transferred to another ward, Aunt Zhang did not say anything. Now that she was in good spirits, she naturally lectured Qin Shi. She lectured Qin Shi until he could not raise his head. In the end, even the little girl could not stand it anymore. She jumped into Aunt Zhang's arms and said coquettishly, "Grandma, Papa cares about you. Don't scold Papa. Oh, Nyan has grown up. You know how to speak up for Papa now." Looking at the little girl's cute appearance, Aunt Zhang could not help but pinch her cheeks. She finally stopped complaining about Qin Shi. The so-called traveling was actually going from a place that one was tired of to a place that others were tired of. It was already the 6th day of the Chinese New Year. The traffic in Jinli and Wuhou Temple had decreased significantly. Although there were still many tourists, it was not enough for the traffic police to block the road. The little girl wanted to eat hot pot, but when she saw the long lines of hot pot restaurants along the way, she immediately pouted unhappily. Thus, Auntie Zhang bought the hot pot base from the supermarket and prepared to make a small hot pot for her at home. When the group returned to 262 Wuhou Temple Street, Kai Shuqin was sitting on the sofa watching TV. But this time, when she saw Qin Shi and his family enter the door, Kai Shuqin's attitude changed drastically. Before Aunt Zhang could call her, Kai Shuqin stood up and warmly invited Qin Shi and his family to take a seat. Then, she excitedly ran to make 2 cups of tea for Qin Shi and Qin Ru. After making tea, Kai Shuqin didn't forget to peel an apple for the little girl. However, Kai Shuqin was very enthusiastic, but the little guy still remembered the grudge. After being ignored by Kai Shuqin last time, the little guy especially disliked this strange aunt. Therefore, when the little guy saw Kai Shuqin about to hand the peeled apple to her, she suddenly turned her head, snorted twice, and climbed from Qin Ruoying's lap to Qin Shi's lap. Qin Ruoying was a little confused. After thanking Kai Shuqin very politely, she took the apple and prepared to feed the little guy. But at this time, the little guy was lying in Qin Shi's arms. No matter how she called, the little guy was unwilling to raise his head. Kai Shuqin could not find a way out of this situation due to his outburst of anger. After smiling at Qin Shi a little awkwardly, Kai Shuqin let Aunt Zhang take care of the child, and she quickly walked to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Qin Shi used 1.8 million to solve the conflict in Aunt Zhang's family, and also made Kai Shuqin completely change. After all, the little guy was not a stingy person. She also saw the changes in Kai Shuqin. As a result, during dinner, the little fellow finally stopped giving her attitude and sat obediently on the chair to gorge himself on the food. At the end of the Spring Festival, the family happily ate the homemade hot pot. That taste, it was simply unimaginable. After dinner, the family prepared to go out for a walk. Aunt Zhang's house was diagonally opposite the Wuhou Temple, so when they walked to the street, they saw the street was full of red lanterns, and the street was full of tourists. The family came to the entrance of Jinli to take a look. After seeing that there were many tourists inside, they dismissed the idea. Therefore, Qin Ruing suggested that they go to the movies. And her suggestion was immediately seconded by the little guy. The little guy had never seen a movie before. And it was not only her, even Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before. Of course, it was not that Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before, but she saw an old theater in the past. The screen was much bigger than the current IMAX, and could accommodate thousands of people at a time. Aunt Zhang's impression of the cinema was still in the 1980s, so she did not really want to go. Seeing this, the little guy was immediately unhappy. He stomped his feet and insisted that his grandmother go with him. Aunt Zhang could not persuade him, so she had no choice but to agree. Therefore, Kai Shuqin went home to take care of the child, while Aunt Zhang and Xie Pinglin accompanied Qin Shi's family to the movies. When buying tickets, Chen Shi actually wanted to buy tickets to the Red Sea operation. However, the little guy was the main character today, so he had no choice but to buy Bonnie Bears. The 4 adults accompanied the child to watch an animated movie. After all, it was an animated movie for young children. Chen Shi originally accompanied the little guy into the theater with the mentality of completing a mission. However, after watching it, he felt that the movie was much better than he had imagined. Apart from the joy and humor, it was also filled with a strong sense of fatherly love and warmth. When the little guy saw the part where Baldi Chong missed his father, he actually cried. Perhaps it was because he thought of the time when he did not have his parents by his side. The little guy cried so hard that he could not stop no matter how Qin Ruoying comforted him. In the end, it was Qin Shi who comforted him that the little guy finally stopped crying. Now that she was crying, it was worth the price of the ticket. It was already very tiring to be highly focused while watching a movie. Moreover, the little guy had cried for a while just now, so he fell into a deep sleep as soon as he left the cinema. The cinema was not far from home, so they did not take a taxi on the way back. As they walked, Chen Shi started chatting with Auntie Zhang. Aunt Zhang, I heard that Rain City is also a tourist attraction? Look, it's rare for Nian to come here. Why don't we go to your hometown and have some fun? Chen Shi was still brooding about the energy cultivation pill's failure, so he deliberately led the conversation to that place. However, when Aunt Zhang heard his words, she waved her hand and laughed. Rain City is a city. My hometown is dozens of kilometers away from Rain City. It's in a small town in the county. What's so fun about a remote place like that? The countryside is even better. Look, Nian has been in big cities like Zhonghai and Shangjing since she was young. Let's take her to see the countryside. Maybe it will be good for her future growth. Aunt Zhang had always attached great importance to Nian's education, so Chen Shi's words immediately touched her heart. Wasn't Mango TV's transfiguration meter very popular? Let the children in the city live in the countryside for a period of time, let them experience the hardships of life and learn to be grateful. Of course, the values of the program itself were distorted and lacked respect for people. The reason why the children fell was not because the family was rich, but because of improper education. Therefore, the education of the children was very important to the parents. Chapter 211. It was only around 10 o'clock, but the streets were already quiet. The little girl was sleeping soundly on Qin Shi's shoulder. She didn't know that her dearest grandma and dad were now discussing throwing her to the countryside to experience life. The city was developing faster and faster. From the 1990s to the millennium, from pagers to mobile phones, and then to Nokia and Motorola. 10 years after 10 years, Nokia went bankrupt, and Motorola was half dead. From the envied Crown and Santala, to the streets full of Land Rovers and Kian. Huaxia went through waves of rapid development. Even credit cards weren't popularized yet, and it directly entered the mobile payment era. Primary school students used their mobile phones to buy crepes, and aunties used QR codes to collect money. The mainland people couldn't afford tea eggs, and it once became a big joke on the internet. Now no one mentioned it. Wan would be recovered sooner or later. In another 10 years, who would dare to mention independence in Hong Kong and Tibet? Huaxia's development speed made the Western countries stunned. It also made them realize that the lion from the east had finally woken up. However, although the economic development speed was fast, some things obviously didn't follow the pace of economic development. Instead, they became slightly worse than before. In the past, everyone called farmers uncle. Later on, people began to call the farmers brothers. Later, the word farmer seemed to become a curse word. Now, the so-called city people, who didn't have ancestors who were farmers. To use a word from the Spring Festival Gala to describe it, that was manic. People nowadays were too manic. A program like Transfiguration shouldn't have appeared. For the children in the city, this program undoubtedly gave them a good education opportunity. It let them see the hardships of ordinary people, so that they learned to respect and cherish their current life. However, for the children and parents in the countryside, this program brought them endless harm and doubts about themselves and society. The kind and simple rural children, after seeing the bright lights of the big city, would they ask one question: why? Why did the second generation rich not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives? Why did the second generation poor not be able to walk out of the mountains for the rest of their lives? Education was never a matter of instant results. It was a long and drawn-out battle. From the moment Qin returned to Nianyan's side, he was already prepared for this battle. He wanted to teach Nianyan a lesson. What is a human? The nature of heaven and earth was the most precious. This rune was in the shape of an elephant's arm and shin. Mortals all follow the example of humans. Man means an upright animal that knows how to bow in humbly. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years for a tree to grow, but 100 years for a man to grow. There was no perfect person in this world. Qin only wanted to do his best to train his daughter into a person that he approved of in his heart. Early the next morning, the whole family set off amidst the little fellow's cheers. In the little guy's understanding, rural areas were no different from tourist attractions. Therefore, when she heard that Qin was going to take her to Aunt Zhang's hometown, the little girl was very excited. Qin rented a commercial car, and then the family of 7 went straight to Rain City. Aunt Zhang's hometown was in Xinxian County under the jurisdiction of Rain City. They first took the highway to Xinxian County, then took the 108 National Highway to the countryside, and after more than 10 kilometers of winding mountain roads, they finally arrived at the production team in Aunt Zhang's hometown. Of course, the name of the production team had been abolished, and now it was called the Villager Group. The little guy had always been in first-tier cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, and all she saw were reinforced concrete jungles. Suddenly coming to such a picturesque place really gave her a very novel experience. Many people didn't know that there were actually 3 Silk Roads. In addition to the mainland passage from Chang and to Rome opened by Zhang Qian in the Han Dynasty, the other was the Southwest Silk Road. The predecessor of the Southwest Silk Road was the Tea-Horse Ancient Road. It went from Sichuan to Dianzhou, through Myanmar to India, and finally to Iran. The 108 National Highway started from Shangjing and ended at Dianzhou's Spring City. It was 3,356 kilometers long. After this highway entered Sichuan, it basically followed the route of the Tea-Horse Ancient Road. The cars zigzagged along the highway. Because it was a winding mountain road, the speed was very slow. On one side of the road was a cliff, and on the other side was a cliff. Below the cliff was a surging river. When had the little guy ever seen such a spectacular scene? Therefore, she was very excited to lie on the car window, looking at the river under the cliff and constantly exclaiming. Most of the rural areas in the north were concentrated, while the rural areas in the south liked to live separately. Therefore, along the road, from time to time, she would see a few lonely small courtyards standing on the edge of the cliff. When the Beijing-Kunming Expressway was not built, the 108 National Highway was the only way to go from Sichuan to Dianzhou. Therefore, many villagers opened restaurants and small stores along the road to earn some extra money from long-distance outsiders to subsidize their families. However, with the completion of the Beijing-Kunming Expressway, the 108 National Highway went into decline. After all, with the expressway, who would still be circling and bumping on the old road? This also led to the economic development of this route almost stagnating and even regressing. Most of the small houses seen along the road were built more than 10 years ago. In recent years, the real estate speculation was so fierce that the people were also greatly affected. Now, anyone who had a little money would go to the county to buy a house and move the family into the county, instead of choosing to build their own house and continue to stay in this place. This was also the result of the development of the times. Aunt Zhang's hometown was more poor and backward than Qinshi imagined. This place was called Tongjiegu. It was a small village that was 5 kilometers away from the nearest town. There were a few 2-story bungalows scattered on both sides of the road. The first floor of the bungalow was a restaurant, but now the door was closed. Even the signboard with the words, dining and accommodation, had become tattered and uncared for. Other than these few houses, most of the other houses were bungalows. Some were even black wooden houses. At first glance, it was obvious that they were old buildings from the 50s and 60s. There was no school in the village. If the children wanted to go to school, they had to spend a yuan every morning to take a van to the town's middle school. However, who did not have a few rich and powerful relatives now? When the children reached the age of middle school, the villagers would send the children to the county or the relative's house in the town. Therefore, there were basically no children in their teens in this place. Instead, there were many children about the same age as Nian Nian. The children were in groups of 3 to 5. As soon as they saw the GL8 from Chengdu, they swarmed over. After Qin Ruing took the little girl out of the car, several children immediately surrounded her and chattered in a dialect that she did not understand at all. This scene was completely out of the little girl's expectations and immediately made her a little scared. The little girl timidly hid most of her body behind Qin Ruing, only revealing half of her head to look at the peers in front of her. She was afraid of others, but the children in front of her were not afraid of her. Instead, they smiled and made faces at her. Aunt Zhang noticed the little girl's strange behavior and laughed like she was chasing ducks. She waved to the children and said, "Go, go, go, go play somewhere else." These children seemed to know Auntie Zhang, so after chattering for a while, they ran away like a swarm of bees. Once the children had run far away, the little one cowered and crawled out from behind Qin Ru. She looked at the bungalows around her and then looked at the shabby bungalow not far away. This small village was built on the national highway. On one side was a mountain, and on the other was a river valley. Because there were few cars passing by now, the village was particularly quiet. The little girl looked at this strange place blankly and suddenly felt a sense of oppression in her heart. Chapter 212. The sunshine of the 7th day of the Chinese New Year shone on her head, but the little fellow's heart was cold. Was this the countryside? Why was it different from what she had imagined? National Highway 108 went straight through the village, and all kinds of old buildings were not arranged neatly on both sides of the street. The arrival of Qin Shi's family caused a lot of noise here, so that many villagers leaned out to observe them silently. The village was not big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. On the left side of the road was a mountain, and a muddy road went straight up the mountain. On the right side was the valley and large fields. The wheat fields in winter were not as beautiful as in autumn. The withered yellow straw was scattered on the field in a disorderly manner, and it was a scene of withering. The car had been booked by Qin Shi, but there were no hotels nearby, so the driver could only drive back to the county to stay. Of course, his expenses for these few days were naturally all on Qin Shi's head. The little fellow wanted to leave with the driver, but was stopped by Qin Ru. When she saw the GL8 turn around and drive away, the little fellow suddenly curled her lips. Looking at that pitiful little appearance, it seemed that she was about to cry. Qin Ruing quickly hugged her in her arms and comforted her. "Nian, be good. This is Grandma's home, don't be afraid. We'll stay here with Grandma for a few days and then go back. Don't you want to accompany Grandma?" Hearing this, the little fellow said with grievance, "I want to be with Grandma, but I don't like it here. I don't like it here. Mama, I want to go home." Children were always a little afraid of strangers. And this was a new environment that the little fellow had never been to, so even if Qin Shi, Qin Ruing, and Grandma were all by her side, the little fellow still felt very uncomfortable and depressed. The little fellow was upset. Her reaction also attracted Qin Shi's attention. When Qin Shi saw her pitiful appearance, he immediately came to Qin Ruing's side. After taking the little fellow from Qin Ruing's arms, Qin Shi said to her with a smile, Ninian, are you scared? However, when the little girl heard Qinshi's question, she immediately turned her little head and muttered unhappily, Papa, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. It's not fun here. Seeing this, Qinshi immediately smiled and asked, Why isn't it fun here? It's just not fun. I don't like it here. Ninian, you're wrong. This place is actually very fun. Not fun at all. Before Qinshi could finish his words, the little fellow had already interrupted him. From the looks of it, she seemed to be angry. Qinshi reached out to pinch her little face, but she swatted his hand away. This little thing was still at odds with her father. When it came to coaxing his daughter, Qinshi was now very handy and had many tricks up his sleeve. Therefore, when he saw that the little fellow seemed to be conflicted, he decisively stopped the topic and asked in a negotiating tone, Ninian, how about this? Let's stay here for one night. If you really don't like it here, Papa will take you home tomorrow, okay? After hearing Qinshi's words, the little fellow rested her head on his shoulder and thought for a moment. Then she reluctantly hummed and reluctantly agreed, Then we'll stay for one night. Just one night. Pinky promise. After that, the little fellow stretched out her little finger and motioned for Qinshi to pinky promise with her. Okay, Papa will pinky promise with you. I promise I'll keep my word. The father and daughter reached an agreement, and the little fellow finally stopped throwing a tantrum. Then, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang's family, they walked down the path to the valley. After walking for about 200 meters, Qinshi's family finally saw Aunt Zhang's old house. Aunt Zhang's old house. It was indeed very old. The living environment in the Kangju district was already very poor, but compared to Aunt Zhang's old house, it was really the difference between a villa hotel and a small train station hotel. This house was built by Aunt Zhang's father's generation. The main materials were wood and yellow mud. Because it was exposed to wind and rain all year round, it caused the wood to mold and turn black. Therefore, when looking from the outside, the whole house was somewhat dark. The house was surrounded by fields, and a few hundred meters down was the river. Not far away, there was a bamboo forest with luxuriant foliage, so much so that it looked quite gloomy in broad daylight. In the morning, Chengdu was still bustling, but after 3 hours, they came to such a quiet and backward little village. Not to mention the little fellow, even Qin Ruing was somewhat not used to it. Although the little fellow had already agreed to stay here for one night, when they were close to the house, she was still somewhat unwilling. She kept twisting her body and shouting for Qinshi to put her down. Qinshi did not say much to her. He carried her directly into the house. At this time, it was right to cut the Gordian knot. After letting her get used to it, naturally, she would not be as resistant as she was now. In reality, Qinshi really thought that this place was not bad. The mountains were clear and the water was clear, and the land was full of outstanding people. Although the house was a little simple, it was good in terms of peace and comfort. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth here was very rich. After staying in this place for a long time, even breathing could make one feel refreshed and very comfortable. A few days ago, Aunt Zhang suddenly fell ill, so Xie Pinglin hurriedly brought the old lady back to Chengdu. They had only been away for a few days, so there was obviously the smell of smoke in this house. This house was actually very big. Looking at it now, it was 4 bedrooms, 1 living room, and 1 kitchen. Overall, it was very good. The only bad thing was that there was no bathroom, so it was very inconvenient to take a bath. Moreover, the bathroom was a latrine, the kind that was extremely smelly. Aunt Zhang was already prepared for this. The bungalow by the street used to be a hotel. There were toilets and bathrooms on the first floor. Aunt Zhang had already informed the owner of the house, so Qinshi's family could go there if they wanted to wash up. After Qinshi carried the little girl around the house, the little girl gradually relaxed, so she turned her little head and began to look around. There was a TV in the living room at home, but it was a small color TV from the 80s and 90s. There was no wall paint in the old house. After a layer of lime was casually applied, newspapers were pasted on the wall as wallpaper. Most of these newspapers were from 30 to 40 years ago, so many of them were already yellowed and rolled up. There was also a portrait of Grandpa Mao on the wall. It was a common poster of that era, so it looked quite old. Although the house was old, it was very clean. Although furniture like the wardrobe and table were old, because of its age, it had a different kind of charm. Perhaps it was because the house and furniture were made of wood that there was always an indescribable wood fragrance in the house. It was very comfortable to smell. Overall, this house was a little too simple on the outside, but the other places were really not as bad as the little girl had imagined. After roughly understanding the internal structure of the house, the little girl could finally accept the fact that she would be staying here for a night. Therefore, she came to the living room under Aunt Zhang's call, then sat on a small stool and ate oranges. Chapter 213. Auntie Zhang's house did not have a TV on demand, nor did it have so many strange toys, so the little fellow lost interest after sitting for a while. She began to wander around. The little fellow wanted to go out and play, but when she stood at the threshold and looked at the large field outside the house, she curled her lips and stopped. She didn't dare to go, in Trump's words, it was her first time here, and she hadn't even warmed up the territory yet. Of course, she didn't dare to go anywhere. The little fellow put one hand on the door and the other hand flipped the corner of her clothes. That pitiful little look was somewhat like a resentful wife waiting for her husband to return from work. Qin Ruiying was helping Kai Shuqin clean up the kitchen. When she came out and saw the little fellow's back, she immediately went to Chen Shi and gently touched him. Chen Shi certainly understood what she meant, so after a slight smile, he suddenly stepped forward and hugged the little fellow from behind. The little fellow exclaimed. When she turned around and saw that it was her father, she couldn't help but pout. Before she could speak, Chen Shi asked with a smile, "Ninian, Mom and Grandma are tidying up the house. Dad will take you out to play, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow turned her head and glanced at the surrounding environment, then muttered in a low voice, "It's not fun here. Why is it not fun? It's just that you're still young and haven't seen those fun things. Let's go, Dad will take you to see it." After that, Chen Shi carried the little fellow and walked directly to the bamboo forest. It was noon now, and the sun was very bright, but once they entered the bamboo forest, there was still a chill in the air. This bamboo forest was quite old, and the branches and leaves were very lush, so much so that it blocked a lot of the sun, looking a little gloomy. Cold and wet places had always been unfavored by mammals, so the little fellow's first reaction was to want to leave. Chen Shi sensed her fear, so he patted her back, and then released a strand of Zhenyuan. Under the true essence, the little fellow immediately had a warm and comfortable feeling, which also gradually calmed her slightly trembling little body. The bamboo forest was not very big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. After Chen Shi brought her into the bamboo forest, he placed the little fellow on the ground. Because very few people would come here, the fallen bamboo leaves had piled up layer after layer. Stepping on them would immediately make a rustling sound. Since the beginning of the new year, the sun had been shining continuously for several days. Therefore, when the little fellow stepped on the ground, the pile of withered leaves began to creak. This made her feel a little interested, so she stepped on it and started jumping around. Seeing that she was no longer afraid, Chen Shi led her to a mother bamboo, then squatted down and said to her, "Ninian, Daddy will teach you how to dig winter bamboo shoots, okay?" "Winter bamboo shoots? What is it?" "This is it." As Chen Shi talked to her, he plucked a tree branch and started digging on the ground. He didn't even have to dig a few times before he dug out a yellowish object from the ground. This thing had a sharp head and a big butt. In terms of shape, it was somewhat similar to baogu. It was wrapped in a thick shell. This was winter bamboo shoots. Winter bamboo shoots were also a characteristic product of the South. They were the most abundant in January and February every year. They had the reputation of golden clothes and white jade, the best among vegetables. Because they had not been unearthed yet, the winter bamboo shoots were tender and white like jade. It was the most common side dish at banquets when cooked with meat. For example, the famous Hua Xia bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat. Digging winter bamboo shoots was actually very simple. Tender bamboo would not grow bamboo shoots. The darker the color, the older the age. Generally, one should not choose too tender or too old. After selecting the bamboo, you can observe it from below. Whenever you see a slight bump in the ground or a loose crack, you can use your feet to lightly step on it. If the ground is not firm and has a soft feeling, it is a sign that there are bamboo shoots. Chen Shi briefly explained to the little fellow, and then handed the tree branch to her. Digging bamboo shoots required a small hoe, but Chen Shi could not find a hoe for the time being, so he could only secretly use his jinchi to loosen the soil for her when the little fellow was digging. Under the guidance of Chen Shi, the little fellow chose a new bamboo and began to dig below. After digging a few times, she felt that the tree branch seemed to have touched something. Her eyes could not help but brighten, and she dug harder. Sure enough, when she dug around the hard thing and dug out the surrounding soil, a winter bamboo shoot buried in the soil finally appeared in front of her eyes. "Papa, I dug it out. I dug it out." After the little fellow pulled the winter bamboo shoot out of the ground, she did not care about the mud on it, grabbed the winter bamboo shoot and waved it excitedly. But at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. The little fellow held the winter bamboo shoot in front of Chen Shi as if she was presenting a treasure. Just as Chen Shi took the winter bamboo shoot with a smile and was about to put it away to make bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat for the little fellow later, the little fellow's eyes suddenly drifted to the low slope in front of the bamboo forest. Following which, she was so frightened that her hands started to tremble. Suddenly, she started to cry loudly. Chen Shi hurriedly hugged the little fellow into his arms and comforted her, and then looked back with a livid face. There was a person behind them. Chen Shi knew about the arrival of this person, but he thought that the other party was a villager here, so he did not pay attention to him. But he did not expect that after seeing this person, the little fellow was so scared that she burst into tears. A mistake. Because there was no divine sense. Chen Shi could only perceive with his 5 senses. After hearing it, he did not look back. When he turned around, he finally understood why this person was able to scare the little girl to tears. It was a woman. An old woman whose specific age could not be determined. Her face was haggard, and her hair was silver. She looked like an ordinary old lady. But what was truly shocking was her attire. This old woman was wearing a brightly colored old-fashioned wedding robe. It was bright red, as dazzling as a young girl who was about to get married. The withered old woman was wearing a bright red wedding robe, and there was an indescribable strangeness about her. Chen Shi's expression turned cold. After picking up the little fellow from the ground, he gently pressed the little fellow's head into his arms. Then, Chen Shi's figure suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already standing in front of the old woman. Chen Shi did not stand on ceremony. With one hand holding the crying little fellow, he directly slapped the old woman's head with the other. However, after Chen Shi's slap, the old woman did not dodge, as if she did not see it. Her gaze was dull, and she was probably either retarded or stupid. Chen Shi did not want to hurt her, but wanted to see her condition. As expected, she was just an ordinary old woman. The only difference was that she had lost her young soul. The little fellow's cries were very loud, and the moment she started crying, it had already alarmed Aunt Zhang in the room. Aunt Zhang quickly ran out of the room. When she came to the courtyard and looked at the bamboo forest, Chen Shi had already returned to his original spot with the little fellow and looked at the old woman from afar. Chapter 214. Under Auntie Zhang's loud call, Chen Shi immediately carried the crying little girl back to Auntie Zhang's courtyard. Auntie Zhang first glared at Chen Shi rather angrily, then angrily took the little girl from Chen Shi's arms. "Look at you, why did you bring her around for no reason? Even the sun can't shine in that old forest. I grew up here and felt that that place was a bit gloomy, so I wouldn't go near there for no reason. It's not like you don't know that children are timid. Are you really not afraid of scaring her?" Auntie Zhang grumbled while carefully comforting the little girl. This time, the little girl was really frightened by the old woman in the wedding robe. Lying in Auntie Zhang's arms, she cried bitterly and couldn't stop no matter how she comforted her. When Qin Ring and Kai Shuqin heard the commotion, they also hurriedly came out of the house. Looking at their somewhat resentful gazes, Chen Shi could only helplessly shake his head. It was indeed his mistake. If he had turned back to look at the old woman earlier, he wouldn't have let the old woman appear in the little girl's line of sight at all. The little girl was frightened and couldn't stop crying for a long time. Seeing this, Chen Shi asked Auntie Zhang to hand the little girl to him, then carried the little girl back and forth in the courtyard. Ninian, it's okay, that strange person has already run away. Daddy is still here, don't be afraid. It seemed that his comforting words worked. After about 2 minutes, the little girl who was still wailing just now actually fell asleep on his shoulder just like that. This made Auntie Zhang finally breathe a sigh of relief. She hurriedly shouted at Chen Shi to put the little girl on the bed, ready to let her have a good sleep first. In fact, the little girl didn't fall asleep on her own. In order to prevent this from leaving a psychological scar on her, Chen Shi had no choice but to cast a mind-loss spell on the little girl. This spell could make the little girl temporarily unconscious. When she woke up, she would forget what had just happened. Chen Shi carried the little girl back to the bed, covered her with a blanket, then turned and left the room. In the living room, Aunt Zhang was still brooding over the fact that Chen Shi ran around with the child, but when Chen Shi told her about the old woman in the wedding gown, Aunt Zhang immediately frowned and muttered thoughtfully, "Old woman in the wedding gown? Could it be that you have met Guifan?" Guifan? Sigh, no wonder Nian was so scared. Looking at Chen Shi's puzzled expression, Auntie Zhang smiled helplessly, and then explained, "Guifan is about the same age as me. When I married and moved to Rong City, she had just gotten married. I haven't seen her for almost 30 years. When I came back for the New Year this year, I heard that Guifan had gone crazy. She's been wearing her wedding dress all day long and wandering around the village, like a ghost. It's so scary." "Crazy? But I heard them say that last year, her son suddenly fell into the river and drowned. Guifan couldn't figure it out and drove herself crazy." "Last year?" "Yes, I heard it was last summer." After hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Chen Shi frowned and didn't say anything for a long time. The old woman in the wedding gown's real name was Zhao Guifan. Chen Shi had close contact with her before, so he knew that she wasn't simply crazy. She clearly looked like she had lost her yang soul. The yang soul was different from the yin soul. Losing the yin soul would only cause the body to be weak and sickly, but if the yang soul was lost, it would cause the yin energy to control the yang. It would cause the human heart to be dark and weak, and the 4 major diseases would come to an end. The dark heart mentioned above referred to people becoming stupid and foolish, just like what Zhao Guifan had just shown. Losing the yang soul meant that one wouldn't live long. Zhao Guifan was only a few years younger than Aunt Zhang. If she was born without a soul, and it was the extremely important yang soul, then she obviously wouldn't have been able to live to such an old age. Without a doubt, Zhao Guifan's sudden madness was definitely not because of her son's death, but because she had lost her yang soul. A perfectly fine person wouldn't lose her yang soul for no reason. Then he thought of Aunt Zhang's sudden and inexplicable faint a few days ago. Chen Shi's expression immediately darkened. This place was really a little strange. The absent-minded curse wasn't as gentle as the meditation curse. This also caused the little fellow to sleep for a long time. When she woke up, she would have to go tomorrow. The countryside wasn't like the city. There were no street lights or billboards here. As soon as the sun set, the entire village would be completely swallowed by the curtain of night. Why did the supernatural phenomenon in the countryside continue? Wasn't it because there were too few entertainment activities in the past? At night, everyone would either wash up and go to sleep, or close the door to make little people to play. It was indeed much better than before. Every household had a TV, and everyone had a 4G phone, so after dark, everyone could watch TV and play with their phones before going to sleep. Perhaps it was because they had returned to the countryside. Aunt Zhang's family rested very early. However, at 9:30 p.m., they all washed up and went to sleep. After the lights in the room were turned off, the outside of the house was suddenly pitch black, and one couldn't even see their fingers. It wasn't spring yet, when everything was recovering. Without the chirping of birds and insects, it was particularly quiet outside the house. Lying on the bed, if one closed their eyes and listened carefully, they could even vaguely hear the sound of flowing water below the valley. Qin Ring sat cross-legged on the bed and silently cultivated. while Chen Shi kept looking in the direction of the window. Suddenly, Chen Shi sat up from the bed. His movement also alarmed Qin Ru. Qin Ruing was about to speak, but Chen Shi had already gently touched the back of her hand, and then whispered, "This place is strange. It shouldn't be a coincidence that Aunt Zhang fell ill before. I'll go out and have a look. I'll be back in a while." Then, Chen Shi got up and quietly left the room. After setting up a restriction to surround the house, Chen Shi flew directly into the sky and carefully looked at the village in front of him from a high place. The spiritual aura was still recovering, and the spiritual aura of heaven and earth here had become very rich. But other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. Chen Shi carefully observed every building in the village, trying to find out what was wrong with it. But at this moment, Chen Shi suddenly found that there seemed to be a figure moving on the path up the mountain. There were only two main roads in the village, one going up the mountain and the other going down the river. The moonlight tonight was very weak. Although it wasn't 10 o'clock in the evening, the road was already dark and he couldn't see anything at all. The person walked on the path without a flashlight or a lantern. He just moved forward in the dark, as if he wasn't afraid that he would fall down. If it weren't for Chen Shi's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people's, he probably wouldn't have been able to find this sneaky person. So, he held his breath and flew above the person's head, wanting to see what this person wanted to do sneaking up the mountain in the middle of the night instead of sleeping. However, when Chen Shi got closer, he suddenly found that. Chapter 215. People who had never been to the countryside might not be able to understand that feeling. That kind of darkness was just like what Qian Zhongshu described in the siege. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. In this kind of night, even ghosts would have to touch their noses and turn around. A cat would hate itself for not being able to use its mustache as an insect's feeler. In the late winter night, the mountain wind whistled. The withered grass and bare branches made a strange creaking sound. The surroundings were pitch black and it was almost impossible to see anything clearly. The tree branches were constantly swaying in the mountain wind. Under the faint moonlight, the shadows of the trees on the mountain walls were like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, wailing and howling as they demanded the lives of passers-by. Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, was wearing a wedding robe and wandering on the mountain road in the middle of the night. If someone were to pass by and shine a flashlight on her body, not to mention the little guy, even a strong-willed adult would be scared to the point of insanity by Zhao Guifan. Chen Shi carefully observed the surroundings, but there were no traces of spiritual energy fluctuations in the surroundings. This meant that Zhao Guifan wasn't being cast by someone, but she wandered here in the middle of the night for no reason. A crazy person's brain circuit really couldn't be understood with common sense. Chen Shi was very interested in Zhao Guifan's situation, so he quietly floated in the air. He wanted to see where Zhao Guifan was not sleeping in the middle of the night and where she was going. There was an abandoned coal mine on the mountain next to Tongjiegu. The winding mud road up the mountain was built by the coal mine owner a few years ago for mining. It was big enough for a large truck to drive normally. The coal mine had been abandoned for many years, and the mud road had been eroded out of shape by the wind and rain. It was very difficult to walk on. Fortunately, it hadn't rained these few days. Otherwise, not to mention Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, even normal villagers would have fallen countless times on the mountain. Zhao Guifan's steps were very slow, so she also walked very steadily. Like a snail, she slowly moved up the mountain along the mud road. Fortunately, the person watching her was Chen Shi. If it was someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to stand the boring wait and would have directly returned to the house to sleep. Zhao Guifan left at 10 in the evening and walked for nearly 4 hours. At around 2 in the morning, she finally arrived at the abandoned coal mine on the mountain. This was a small coal mine. It was different from the underground coal mine shown in the blind shaft. There was no elevator here. Instead, a hole was drilled into the mountain wall. Then one would follow the hole and push forward. This was the so-called adit mine. Compared to the development of inclined wells and vertical wells, adit development was the simplest in terms of technology, the cheapest in terms of economy, and also the safest development method. However, this mining method was only suitable for mountainous areas, so it was usually only found in small coal mines in the southwest. The passageway of the mine was a circular arch. It was dark inside the cave, and the weak moonlight couldn't shine in at all. No one knew what Zhao Guifan was thinking. After arriving at the mine, she actually swaggered directly into the mine. It was true that the reckless were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. Wasn't this crazy woman the one who didn't care about her life? Not to mention that it was still early in the morning. Even if it was noon, when the sun was at its brightest, not many people would dare to enter this abandoned mine. Zhao Guifan had already gone crazy. A lunatic who didn't sleep in the middle of the night and went up the mountain in the dark into this abandoned mine. Thinking about it, it was also a very strange thing. Chen Shi made up his mind today to get to the bottom of this matter, so after seeing Zhao Guifan enter the cave, he also flew into the dark cave entrance. As soon as they entered the cave, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped several degrees. There was no light in the cave at all. As soon as Zhao Guifan entered the cave, her figure completely disappeared in the darkness. Chen Shi snapped his fingers, and a fluorescent green light ball flew out from his fingertips. The light ball flew to Zhao Guifan's head, illuminating the road ahead for her. In this regard, Zhao Guifan didn't have any reaction. She just continued to walk forward. There were sidewalks on both sides of the adit mine, and in the middle was the mine cart track. Zhao Guifan walked all the way along the track. After walking for about 10 minutes, a fork suddenly appeared in front of her. One to the left, the other to the right. However, Zhao Guifan didn't stop at all. She turned and walked directly into the fork on the right. Therefore, it could be seen that this crazy woman obviously came here often before, so she was very familiar with this place. After walking for about 40 minutes, Zhao Guifan finally came to the end. She stood at the end of the passage for a while, and then a smile suddenly appeared on her withered old face. As if she saw something, Zhao Guifan quickly went up to greet her. "Son, mother is here to see you," Zhao Guifan said, while squatting in front of the plant at the end of the mine. This was a very strange scene. The mine was an extremely damp and gloomy place that didn't see the sun all day long, but a plant actually appeared. The plant stem was upright, and the plant was tall, about 1 meter tall. Its appearance was very similar to a reed, but the color was completely different. Reeds were also called reeds. The so-called reeds were green, and the white dew was frost. Reeds were green in spring, but in autumn, they would wither and turn yellow. It was the end of winter and the beginning of spring, and most of the plants outside were still in a withered state. But this reed-like plant that grew in the deepest part of the mine was bright red. It was bright red, and in terms of the degree of beauty, it was even more beautiful than the sea of poppy flowers. This was a very strange scene. A crazy woman in a wedding robe at this moment was like a kind mother, squatting on the ground and rubbing her cheek against the red reed. The reed leaves gently brushed against her face, but she was like her son's hand caressing her cheek, very warm and comfortable. Chen Shi silently stood behind Zhao Guifan. When he saw this plant for the first time, he already understood why Zhao Guifan had gone crazy. Her madness was because of this plant in front of him. Although this plant looked very similar to a reed, it was not a reed at all, but a harmful plant called blood thorn by immortal cultivators. Blood thorn was not a very common plant in the heavenly jade world. The reason it was called blood thorn was because this plant was bright red, and it could emit a special fragrance to attract prey to come close. Once the prey came close, their soul would be taken, and they would willingly let it suck their blood. It was strange enough that a plant that only existed in the heavenly jade world appeared on Earth, but what made Chen Shi feel even more strange was blood thorn was a clump of plants, and as long as it grew, it would definitely grow in patches, like reeds forming a reed marsh. But there was only one blood thorn in front of him, and it grew in such a remote and gloomy abandoned mine. In the heavenly jade domain, a large-scale bloodthorn sea would be classified as a forbidden area by cultivators, and no one would trespass. This was because in addition to causing hallucinations to trap prey, This plant could also directly launch a mental attack. An ant could not bite an elephant to death, but what if the ants became a disaster? The overwhelming number of ants swarmed forward. Not to mention the elephant, even the blue whale would be eaten up in an instant. Although there was only one blood thorn here, it was still very aggressive. After discovering Qin Shi, it directly launched an invisible spiritual attack at Qin Shi. But it was a pity it did not know who it had provoked today. Without seeing Qin Shi do anything, he just stared and the soil under the blood thorn directly loosened and exploded. Then, Qin Shi gently waved at the blood thorn. This blood thorn was immediately uprooted by an invisible vital energy and flew directly into his hand. When the blood thorn was planted on the ground, it was about a meter tall. After being uprooted, the roots below were at least 30 centimeters long. Its roots were similar to the roots of a reed, and there were many adventitious roots on it. When the blood thorn was uprooted by Qin Shi, the adventitious roots on its roots suddenly twisted crazily like earthworms, which looked very disgusting. The blood thorn lived by devouring souls and blood essence. After being used as medicine, it would naturally be very beneficial to the soul and blood essence of immortal cultivators. Wasn't this the main ingredient that Qin Shi lacked now? The blood thorn kept twisting in Qin Shi's hand, and at the same time, it kept trying to send out spiritual attacks to disturb Qin Shi's thoughts. Qin Shi found it long-winded, so he directly grabbed its stem with both hands. Following a soft ka, the sound, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. This blood thorn was directly broken into two by him. The world was finally quiet. Because Zhao Guifan was directly pulled back by Qin Shi, she was now unconscious. After Qin Shi cast a meditation spell on her, he used vital energy to support her and then walked back along the original path. When Qin Shi came to the fork again, he suddenly stopped. The mine was very quiet. There were usually bats in the cave, but it was winter now. Although bats were warm-blooded animals, they also needed to hibernate. So this abandoned mine was very quiet, and only the faint sound of water dripping could be heard. Qin Shi stood at the fork and paused for a moment. When he stepped out again, he did not walk towards the cave entrance, but went to the left tunnel that he did not go to just now. This abandoned mine was a little interesting. It actually grew a blood thorn that only existed in the heavenly jade domain. Since he was already here, he naturally had to explore the inside and outside of the mine tonight to see if there was anything rare in here. Qin Shi walked along the left tunnel. Zhao Guifan was being guided by his vital energy, lying flat and floating behind him. Plus, there was the fluorescent green light above Qin Shi's head. If this scene was seen by others, it would not be as simple as causing them to lose their minds. They would directly be scared to death. The mine tunnel on the left was obviously the main tunnel. After Qin Shi walked for a while, the mine tunnel suddenly changed from one track to two, and the width on both sides obviously increased by a lot. This should be the main mining area. Along the way, there were many forks in the road, but Qin Shi didn't hesitate at all. She didn't even look at those forks, and just went straight down the main road. He had already discovered the abnormality here. In the depths of this abandoned mine, there was a paradise with abundant spirit energy. The spirit energy here was even richer than in the Qinling Mountains. It was probably because this place happened to be in the position of the dragon vein of this mountain. So after the spirit energy recovered, this place directly became a paradise. Qin Shi walked along the main tunnel for about 10 minutes before he finally stopped. Because a huge cave suddenly appeared in front of him. This cave was like a flask. The passage Qin Shi was in was the narrow mouth of the flask, and the inside of the cave was the belly of the flask. Qin Shi walked into the cave, and the surrounding terrain suddenly opened up. This cave was about 4 or 5 meters high, and the actual area was about the size of a basketball court. It was not too big, but it looked very strange. Obviously, the miners would not be so bored as to dig such a strange cave in the coal mine. Chapter 217. Qin Shi quietly stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the top of the cave. He seemed to have seen something, but because the surrounding light was too dim, he gently snapped his fingers. Under the surge of true essence, the ball of fluorescent green light suspended in midair suddenly flew to the center of the cave, and then became brighter and brighter. Then the ball of light directly turned from green to white, and constantly bloomed with dazzling light. The ball of light emitted a strong light like the summer sun, and instantly lit up every corner of the cave. In an instant, the light was as bright as day, and the fine details could be seen clearly. With the light source, Chen Shi directly walked into the cave with Zhao Guifan. At this time, he raised his head again and looked at the top of the cave. There were actually 3 people hanging above the cave. He saw that in the center of the cave, about 3 meters above the ground, a wooden beam was placed on the wall at both ends of the cave. And on this beam, there were 3 people in red wedding robes hanging in order. The 3 of them had their heads down, and their faces were facing down. Their hair was messy, and their long hair hung down naturally, covering their faces. Therefore, it was impossible to tell whether they were male or female, and even whether they were dead or alive. They were hung on the beam with their heads down, and their appearance was somewhat similar to the cured meat that was hung outside the balcony in winter, one after another, and arranged very neatly. What was even more strange was that these people's feet were tied with thick ropes, and there was a medium-sized weight hanging on their feet. The weight was tied with a thin rope, and it hung on their feet, naturally hanging to the ground. And below the weight, there was a wooden basin filled with clear water. In addition, around the wooden basin, there were 3 small incense burners, and they were in a tripartite formation, surrounding the basin in the middle. Each of the small incense burners had a red incense candle inserted into it. The incense candles were already lit, and a light breeze blew, and the candle flame was constantly dancing with the breeze. In the deepest part of the abandoned coal mine, such a strange scene actually appeared, and it was really a bit shocking. Chen Shi silently sized up the layout of the cave, then put Zhao Guifan down on the sidewalk outside the cave, and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The beam was made of wood, the weight was made of gold, the clear water was made of water, the candle was made of fire, and the surrounding area was made of earth. Since it was an arrangement of the 5 elements, he could calculate the time. This year was the year of Wushu, the 2nd month of the lunar year was the 1st month of the lunar year, and the 8th day of the lunar year was the 1st day of the lunar year. Wushu is yang, Jane is yang, Bingshu is yang. Yang year, yang month, yang day. Once the sun rose, it would be 1/4 noon, which was also the legendary time of the sun. It was clearly a sunny day, but Chen Shi found such a sinister and evil arrangement in this gloomy and abandoned mine. Now that was interesting. Chen Shi swaggered into the depths of the cave. At this moment, the person who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground slowly opened his eyes when he heard his footsteps. Yes, there was a person in the cave. That person was sitting cross-legged on the futon below the 3 people in red. He was about 40 years old, wearing a black robe with a cold face and a bun on the top of his head. This dressing was somewhat like a priest in a Taoist temple. He didn't open his eyes when Chen Shi lit up the cave. Until Chen Shi walked directly into the cave without even saying hello, the person finally couldn't help but open his eyes. After opening his eyes, he first looked up at the light ball suspended above the cave, then looked at Chen Shi and asked, "Mister, why are you here so late at night?" Hearing this, Chen Shi asked with interest, "Are you an alchemist?" "No, I'm a warlock." "Warlock?" Seeing Chen Shi's puzzled look, the person couldn't help but look at him a few more times, then asked curiously, "You don't know about warlocks?" "I really don't know. I wonder if Mister can explain it to me." Alchemist, warlock, and sorcerer. Since Qin Shi Huang killed the alchemists, the theory of yin and yang disasters arose in Western Han. Because of the different ideas, the sorcerer was divided into 2 factions, alchemist and warlock. I'm the successor of the warlock. Alchemist? Warlock? Chen Shi pondered for a moment, then asked again, "What's the difference between the 2? However, when the person heard Chen Shi's question, it was as if he had heard a joke. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. In terms of origin, there's no difference between the 2. The reason why there are 2 different factions, alchemist and warlock, is just because those hypocrites insist on the distinction between good and evil. What is good? What is evil? Alchemists are good, warlocks are evil. This is the difference between alchemists and warlocks. Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but glance at the layout of the cave. His heart suddenly had the most intuitive understanding of the warlock. Even cultivation had to use such evil methods. No wonder the world said that warlocks were evil. This really wasn't slandering them. Thank you, mister, for your explanation, but I still have a question to ask. Please ask. It was just the first time they met, but the two of them were like old friends, asking and answering questions. It was really a bit magical. I want to ask, why did Mr. arrange this? Chen Shi said while pointing at the 3 red-clothed people hanging on the beam. Hearing this, that person glanced at the blood-thorn grass in Chen Shi's hand with deep meaning. Then he suddenly laughed out loud. He seemed to be very proud of his masterpiece. After raising his head to look at the 3 red-clothed people above him, that person proudly introduced to Chen Shi, "This is a cultivation method that I have spent several decades of effort to create. I have combined many inheritances in the world and went through untold hardships to create. I have named it 5 Elements Soul Refining Technique. The red-clothed soul locks. The weight drops the soul 1 foot above the ground. The soul can't escape with the earth, so the soul stays. The soul guide needle opens the Naiwan Palace, leads the soul out of the body, hangs on the beam, and hooks the soul with wood. The water and fire array is placed below the feet. The water melts the soul. The fire tempers the soul so it can remove the impurities of the soul. 1 out of 10, only 1 part of the essence will be drawn into the body. After the essence enters the body, you must immediately enter a meditative state, using the essence as a guide to circulate 36 small cycles. When the essence is exhausted, you will circulate 18 large cycles. The external essence will guide your own essence. After completing the cycle, you will not leave each other, touching the heavenly acupoints to open the jade door. If the jade door is opened, it means that you have successfully condensed your essence and you have stepped onto the path of immortality. After the man explained the layout of the cave, he looked at Chen Shi with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "I've been thinking about this set of techniques for many years, but I haven't been able to perfect it. Until last year, when I accidentally found this mysterious plant, I finally understood the crux of it and perfected this 5 elements soul refining technique." As he spoke, he pointed at the blood thorn in Chen Shi's hand. The expression on his face became playful. However, Chen Shi didn't have the self-awareness of a thief. He picked up the blood thorn and casually glanced at it, then nodded and smiled. "Although this blood thorn can steal souls, it is only a plant. I didn't expect you to be able to comprehend the truth of cultivation from it. It is truly admirable. Zhang Sanfeng is probably not much better than this." Chen Shi wasn't lying. This person was born on a planet like Earth, but he was able to rely on his own exploration to find the threshold of cultivation. If this kind of talent was placed in the heavenly jade world, there was no way to imagine what he would achieve now. Then I would like to ask, in the past 100 years, has anyone ascended to immortality? Successfully flew into the gate of heaven? I'm afraid they haven't even seen the shadow of the heavenly gate. They worship ancient books all day long as if they're their ancestors. Can they become immortals just like that? Hearing this, Chen Shi looked at Sun Wen thoughtfully and didn't say anything. When Sun Wen saw his expression, he immediately smiled proudly and said, "In fact, as far as this old man knows, this celestial being is not the end, but the starting point." As soon as these words were spoken, they resounded throughout the cave like the sound of metal being thrown to the ground. The celestial being was not the end, but the starting point. In a sense, this statement was not wrong. The celestial being was almost above the foundation establishment stage and below the Jindan stage. They who had yet to condense a golden core could only be regarded as low-level cultivators. They had not touched the threshold of the immortal Tao at all. At this point, Sun Wen suddenly let out a burst of strange laughter as if he was mocking something. He said with a look of disdain, "Those people keep talking about Elysium all day long and count on Elysium for everything. They're completely putting the cart before the horse. The path of flowers has never been swept by a destined guest, but the gate of heaven has been opened for you from now on. It's not that one can only ascend to immortality after opening the gate of heaven, but that the gate of heaven will only be opened for you when one's cultivation has succeeded. Very insightful. Chen Shi nodded sincerely, expressing his agreement with Sun Wen's words. Sun Wen's point of view was completely different from the village's point of view. Clearly, there was still a lot of debate about the legend of the gate of heaven in this world. Chen Shi didn't say anything. After Sun Wen finished his last sentence, he suddenly closed his mouth and looked at him with a faint smile. The cave was strangely quiet. A gust of cold wind came from nowhere. When the wind blew, the 3 red-clothed people hanging on the beams suddenly started to sway. It looked like 3 red-clothed female ghosts were dancing in the cave. Chen Shi held the blood-thorn grass and stood casually not far from the cave entrance. Sun Wen looked at the bold young man in front of him with a half-smile. After a moment of silence, Chen Shi finally broke the silence. I have another question to ask. Please speak. Sir, why are you telling me these things? Hearing this, Sun Wen suddenly laughed and said, This old man has been in seclusion for a long time, and it's been many years since I've chatted with someone like today. Speaking of this, Sun Wen's expression changed, and a fierce light appeared in his eyes. He said coldly, You and I can be considered to be fated, but unfortunately, in addition to trespassing on my cave residence today, you also destroyed the immortal grass that I have painstakingly cultivated for many years. I'm afraid you can only pay for this with your life. Why would he say so much to a young man he didn't know? Wasn't it because he had created a peerless cultivation method, but there was no way to publicize it? Only the dead could keep a secret. Therefore, from the moment Chen Shi stepped into the cave, Sun Wen had no intention of letting him leave alive. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but sigh deeply and said, Sir, you have great talent, but it's a pity that you've gone astray. What a pity! With that, he held the blood-thorn grass with his right hand and raised his left hand, making an inviting gesture to Sun Wen. Seeing this, Sun Wen's face turned cold, and he couldn't figure out this young man's background. This was obviously his immortal's cave, yet this young man had such a confident appearance. Could it be that he had some backing? Thinking of this, Sun Wen frowned and asked, Who exactly are you? Chen Shi smiled, and suddenly an idea popped up in his mind, so he said to Sun Wen, Wu Lian, Special Affairs Department. Special Affairs Department, Special Affairs Department Office. Compared to the Emergency Department, the Special Affairs Department was the real main department of the Wu Lian. Obviously, Sun Wen wasn't really cut off from the world, so when he heard Chen Shi say the word Special Affairs Department, his face instantly darkened, and he immediately rushed towards Chen Shi. In the eyes of Hua Xia's cultivators, the word Wu Lian was a very unlucky existence. This organization was part of the country's power, and once Sun Wen's secret was discovered by the Wu Lian, it would be no different from being stuck with dog skin plaster. Unless he left Hua Xia, what awaited him would be the Wu Lian's endless pursuit. After dealing with this young man, he would have to find another place to cultivate in seclusion. Sun Wen was slightly different from great-granduncle. Great-granduncle was a martial artist, from the outside to the inside. Sun Wen was a sorcerer, from the inside to the outside. Therefore, their fighting styles were very different. When Sun Wen rushed towards Chen Shi, he suddenly waved his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Chen Shi. A black shadow suddenly flew out from his hand. Then, the black shadow seemed to have turned into a malicious spirit, its face contorted as it screamed. The ghost didn't make any sound, but at this moment, a sharp, ear-piercing howl suddenly rang in Chen Shi's mind. The sound was like the sound of 2 pieces of foam rubbing against each other. It was exceptionally harsh and unpleasant to the ear, and could instantly cause goosebumps to rise on anyone who heard it. Using a killing move right from the start, Sun Wen really wasn't prepared to let this young man leave alive today. Yellow Sky Path of Spirits. Samsara Impermanence. The first of every month, the routine of asking for monthly votes. Chapter 219. Sun Wen's claw was very similar to the 9-in white bone claw. As he waved his claw, A ghost shadow suddenly appeared in the air and went straight for Qin Shi. Looking at the way the ghost was moving, it was obvious that this move must be a combination of internal and external attacks. Not only could it hurt the enemy's body physically, but it could also affect the enemy's soul spiritually. It was extremely evil. The malicious ghosts kept howling, and invisible sound waves came one after another. Qin Shi was not affected at all. He stood in place with a smile, and his heart was constantly trying to figure out Sun Wen's cultivation method. When the black shadow was about to pounce on him, Qin Shi finally made a move. He raised his left hand and pointed a finger at it. That black shadow was like a shadow that had seen the sun. It screamed miserably and disappeared in midair. Sun Wen could not help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent today. After Sun Wen called himself a virtuous teacher, he was actually the successor of Zhang Jiao. As a top-notch necromancer after Su Fu, Zhang Jiao had attained a peerless cultivation base with the art of peace and peace that he had obtained from an unknown source. Because of that, he was honored as a great teacher. The impermanence of samsara came from the Taiping essential technique, and it was an upgraded version that Sun Wen improved with the 5 elements soul refining technique. He did not expect that Qin Shi could easily break it with one finger. How could Sun Wen not be surprised? How was this a young man? He was clearly an old monster who had a technique to retain his youthful appearance. In fact, Sun Wen was not a middle-aged man. He was born during the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty and was already more than 180 years old. Sun Wen's talent was indeed far superior to ordinary people. As the only remaining successor of the Taiping path, he had already stepped into the soul conduit realm in his 40s under the guidance of his master. He was known as the Taiping Heavenly Master. After becoming a Heavenly Master, Sun Wen was not willing to be mediocre. Instead, he began to travel around to find a way to go further. Sun Wen was different from great-granduncle. He did not believe that the Heavenly Gate could allow people to ascend. Therefore, he had never counted on the Heavenly Gate. Instead, he had been quietly cultivating. He practiced diligently all day long, which made his cultivation far superior to great-granduncle. In fact, Sun Wen was only one step away from being able to form the 3 flowers and truly step into the golden core realm. With the revival of the spirit qi of heaven and earth, Sun Wen had also found a way to cultivate qi. Perhaps if he was given enough time, Sun Wen would be able to carve out a path of his own. Regardless of whether it was good or evil, as long as he could continue down this path, then it was the right path. Unfortunately, Sun Wen met Qin Shi today. He was like a walking steel plate in this world. Therefore, when Sun Wen saw that his move was easily broken by Qin Shi, he immediately stopped and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" "I've already told you. It's the Wu Yen Special Affairs Department." Sun Wen was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. Therefore, he coldly shouted in anger, pretending to be mysterious, "Since that's the case, I'll capture you first and then slowly interrogate you." After he finished speaking, Sun Wen's black robes began to flutter even though there was no wind. A strong storm suddenly blew in the cave. 2 long dragons of murderous aura rolled out from Sun Wen's sleeves like tornadoes in the desert, roaring as they rushed towards Qin Shi. These 2 tornadoes were actually formed by Sun Wen's magical power. In the process of rushing towards Qin Shi, the 2 tornadoes even intertwined with each other, turning into a sharp, cone-shaped cyclone. The cyclone spun rapidly like a sharp knife. Like a high-speed drill, when the cyclone rushed towards Qin Shi, it also tore a vacuum in the air. This move was monstrous, but when Qin Shi saw it, he shook his head in disappointment. Compared to the improved version of the Samsara Impermanence, this move did not have any special features. It looked powerful, but in fact, it was the simplest way to use vital essence. It was just using brute force to break through all techniques. This was also a method that Qin Shi often used. Perhaps he wanted to force Sun Wen to take out his trump card. So when the cyclone rushed towards him, Qin Shi raised his left hand. Like fishing in the water, he directly reached into the center of the cyclone, and then he squeezed hard. This fierce cyclone was like a poisonous snake that was pinched by him. After struggling helplessly for a while, It turned into countless bursts of energy and dissipated. The chi that scattered in all directions hit the rock walls of the cave, and like a machine gun, countless stones fell from the rock walls with a crackling sound. The rubble fell to the ground, and a rustling sound was heard. Under Sun Wen's incredulous gaze, Chen Shi calmly raised an index finger, then smiled slightly. "You still have one last chance to make a move, don't let me down." Hearing this, Sun Wen could not help but widen his eyes, the hair on his body stood up, and the expression on his face was like he had seen a ghost. It was no wonder he was afraid. The move just now was Sun Wen's own killing move. In terms of lethality, it was a bit stronger than the Samsara impermanence. It was not that he was boasting, but as long as this move was used, even a great master in the gang state would be instantly turned into minced meat. But after Qin Shi put her hand in, she acted as if nothing had happened. Immediately after, blood began to ooze out of his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, bleeding from all orifices. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment before he suddenly came back to his senses. Sun Wen was burning his blood essence. As expected, when Sun Wen began to burn his blood essence, the aura on his body suddenly rose and exploded. The yin and yang fish in front of his chest also completely turned into a gray ball of light because of the rapid rotation. Sun Wen let out another roar. His sleeves bulged like a dragon, and then he suddenly pushed the light ball outward. Then, the gray light ball suddenly carried an indescribable aura and directly pressed toward Qin Shi. Yin-Yang Calamity, Mountain River Seal. Destroy. Chapter 220. Tai Chi gave birth to Yin and Yang gave birth to the 4 divisions, and the 4 divisions gave birth to the 8 trigrams. Tai Chi was the fusion of vitality before heaven and earth were separated. It was the beginning and the unity of the universe. Simply put, Tai Chi represented chaos and yin and yang. The 4 divisions were the 5 elements. Metal, wood, water, and fire represented north, south, east, and west respectively. Earth was in the center of the 4 divisions and did not exist in the cycle of the 4 divisions. Therefore, it was also called the central earth, representing heaven and earth. Only with heaven and earth would there be the 4 divisions. Without heaven and earth, there would naturally be no 4 divisions. Therefore, earth was the first of the 5 elements and the beginning of all things. The mountain and river seal belonged to the earth element. This was Sun Wen's strongest killing move. The moment the mountain and river seal was formed, Chen Shi could not help but raise his eyebrows. He could not help but have a serious expression on his face. Sun Wen had actually seen through the 5 elements and reversed yin and yang from the 4 divisions. From this, he had touched the true essence of Tai Chi with his strength as a peak diviner. He had actually struck out an attack that was not inferior to the divine generals when he burned his essence blood. Just this move alone was enough for Sun Wen to surpass many cultivators in this world. Just as the black and white yin-yang fish turned into a gray ball of light due to the high-speed rotation, Sun Wen's face deteriorated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just now, he looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. However, in the blink of an eye, his hair and beard were all white. He looked like an old man with half a foot in the ground. His haggard and weak appearance was somewhat similar to Zhao Guifan, who had lost her young soul and had her blood sucked by the blood thorns all day long. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices and his face was rapidly aging. However, Sun Wen's eyes suddenly flashed with joy. After pushing the gray ball of light towards Qin Shi, he couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a long howl of excitement. Success! The gray ball of light was formed by Sun Wen's true essence and Dharma power. It contained his lifetime of cultivation. It was like a ball of smoke in a bubble. As it flew toward Qin Shi, the ball of light seemed to be constantly rolling and rising. In terms of appearance, there was nothing strange about it. However, in Qin Shi's opinion, this ball of light was not simple. Sun Wen did not disappoint him. Thus, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh. Earth element? You've come at the right time. Watch me use my lightning technique to break your earth element technique. The 5 elements mutually reinforce and counteract each other. Zhen represented thunder, and Sun represented wind. Zhen and Sun belonged to wood, and wood restrained earth. Thunder just so happened to restrain earth. After saying that, Chen Shi suddenly let go of the blood thorn grass in his hand. Then, a blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. In that instant, lightning appeared in the void, and thunder exploded. Chen Shi stood proudly with the thunderbolt in his hand. Since Sun Wen was not a celestial being, he would control his cultivation base to that of a celestial being. It was also a form of respect for him to deal with someone of the same level. Thunder versus Earth. 49 Forms of Heavenly Divination, Spell Chapter. Thunder Art of Delusion. Chen Shi was like a god descending, holding 2 thunderbolts in his hands. The blue lightning was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, constantly bubbling in Chen Shi's palm. When the gray ball of light flew towards him, Chen Shi opened his arms and fanned at the gray ball of light as if he was waving a banana fan. The thunderbolt and the gray ball collided in the air. In an instant, the aura energy shot out in all directions, and the surging true essence instantly set off an earth-shattering explosion in the cave. The abandoned mine that had long been dilapidated collapsed under the impact of the explosion, instantly turning into a pile of ruins. Ding! Chen Shi arrived at the 108 National Highway. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. He picked up his phone and opened it. It was a push message from Tencent News. #Earthquake News #February 24th 04, 17 a.m. A magnitude 3.2 earthquake occurred in the Xingxian area of Yuyu City. The tremor was not strong. The final result is based on the official report. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. After the Tangshan earthquake, 2 major earthquakes occurred in Huaxia in succession. This also meant that everyone began to pay more attention to news about earthquakes. It was estimated that the news of the earthquake in Yuqing would spread all over the country again tomorrow. After Chen Shi finished reading this news, he opened his contact list and found the name Qin Xueqing in the contact list. Then he dialed the number. Although it was 4 in the morning, after the phone rang twice, Qin Xueqing directly picked up. Obviously, she was not sleeping but cultivating. Hello. I just met a person. Sun Wen, do you know him? Sun Wen? I seem to have an impression of him, but I'm not very sure. Wait a moment, I'll check first. After saying that, Qin Xueqing directly hung up the phone, obviously to make a call to verify. His sister-in-law was really swift and decisive. Chen Shi held the phone and waited for about 5 minutes before she called back. I found him. Sun Wen from the Way of Peace, celestial level. He was born in the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty. The last time he appeared was 20 years ago. At this point, Qin Xueqing's tone could not help but be a little confused. She asked, "How did you meet such an old monster?" Yeah, I don't know if I'm lucky or he's unlucky. Send someone here. He's a celestial after all. Capturing him for a vivisection seems to be a contribution to society, right? After Qin Shi's voice fell, there was no sound from the other end of the phone for a long time. Qin Xueqing thought that Qin Shi only met Sun Wen face to face, but now that she heard the meaning of his words, did this mean that he was going to capture Sun Wen alive? Capturing a celestial alive? Her sister-in-law was stunned for a while before she came back to her senses. Then, she jumped out of bed slightly agitatedly and said quickly, "I'll bring someone over right away. What's the address?" "I'll send you the location." "Okay." Chen Shi would not joke with her on this kind of issue, so Qin Xueqing did not have any doubts at all. After hanging up the phone, she left the Sai courtyard. The Wu Lian had been established for so many years, but they had never captured a celestial alive. Who knew how much credit this was? In fact, it was not that the Wu Lian could not capture a celestial. It was just that capturing a celestial required extremely careful arrangements, and it would even cause a lot of trouble. Right now, everything was about maintaining stability. Therefore, Wu Lian could only turn a blind eye to the existence of the celestials. As long as they did not go too far, the Wu Lian would not encircle and annihilate them. Chen Shi did not kill Sun Wen. Sun Wen was worthy of respect. After all, objectively speaking, if Sun Wen cultivated in the Tianyuan world for 500 years, perhaps his achievements would far surpass Qin Shi's. This was talent. Wasn't talent the most lacking in the 21st century? Although Sun Wen was not a good person, Qin Shi was not a judge after all. Handing him over to the Wu Lian and letting the Wu Lian deal with him was really a contribution to society. After all, there were always a lot of things in this world that ordinary people could not achieve. They didn't even have the right to know. Most of the villagers were waiting at the intersection to see the atomic bomb. Chen Shi looked at the little girl for a while. After seeing that the little girl was still unhappy, he was ready to take her to dig winter bamboo shoots again. But just as Qin Shi and his family were about to leave, a saber-toothed tiger police armored vehicle suddenly drove down from the mountain. Seeing this, the villagers immediately let out a burst of enthusiastic cheers. The car was a special bulletproof car modified by a Ford Raptor. It was nearly 7 meters long, more than 3 meters tall, and weighed 6 tons. Its appearance was also very handsome. And behind this car, there were 3 warriors, which were real military off-road vehicles. The 4 cars slowly drove down from the mountain. Under the command of the police, the villagers retreated to the sides and made way for the cars. Qin Shi and his family stood on the 108 National Highway. While he was explaining to the little girl about the big cars in front of them, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly stopped in front of their family. Then, Qin Shuecheng walked out from the front passenger seat. The sister-in-law first greeted Qin Ru. After calling her sister, she turned to look at Qin Shi and said to him quite seriously, "Thank you." "It's nothing." Qin Shi waved his hand very casually, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Hearing this, Qin Shuecheng nodded, then turned to look at Aunt Zhang and said to her very politely, "Aunt Zhang, I'm Qin Shuecheng. I've seen you in the courtyard before, but I was still young at that time. I don't know if you still remember me?" Yes, of course I remember." Aunt Zhang was confused by Qin Shuecheng. Why was Yingying's sister sitting in the car? Aunt Zhang was not very familiar with Qin Shuecheng, so she didn't know what to talk to her about. Seeing this, Qin Shi interrupted in time and said, "Are you busy? Do you want to have lunch before leaving?" Chapter 223. How to deal with Sun Wen had become a problem. It would be a pity to kill him, but it would be difficult to resolve the hatred in his heart if he didn't kill him. Using living people to cultivate and turning them into idiots was an evil art that went against the harmony of the heavens. He would definitely suffer retribution. Chen Shi was probably Sun Wen's savior. Since that was the case, Chen Shi could only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and let Sun Wen experience Zhao Guifen's pain. Thus, Chen Shi specially refined a pill for Sun Wen. For this reason, he even used a bit of blood thorn grass. It could be said that wool comes from a sheep's back. Heart-devouring ants. However, they weren't ants. They were a type of pill, or rather, poison. When someone consumed this pill, they would feel as if their entire body was being bitten by fire ants every half an hour. The heart-wrenching pain didn't come from the body, but from the soul. Thus, it couldn't be described with words. It was densely packed, as if every inch of their skin was being burned by fire and pierced by needles. Every time the pill took effect, the poisoned person would feel a pain worse than death. They could only lie on the ground weakly, struggling and praying for the pill's effect to pass quickly. This pill came from the most poisonous sect in Heavenly Spiral. It was also developed by them to punish disciples who committed grave mistakes. It didn't harm their lives, but it also made them feel a pain worse than death. It made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts, and they would never dare to commit the same mistake again. Although this pill couldn't kill people, it was said that many disciples couldn't withstand the endless heart-wrenching torture and chose to commit suicide to seek relief. He didn't know if Sun Wen could withstand this kind of torture. Chen Shi only hoped that Sun Wen could be strong and not be played to death. If Sun Wen died, it might really be a great loss to the Wulian. Lunch was authentic farmhouse food. Because Auntie Zhang's house didn't have any natural gas or induction cookers, the old house naturally used a firewood stove. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but the food made from the firewood stove seemed to be exceptionally fragrant. The little fellow sniffed and picked up a piece of bamboo shoot. After tasting it, she immediately pointed at the plate of bamboo shoots fried with meat and laughed happily. "I dug this. Good, good, good. Let's see what you're capable of." Auntie Zhang smiled and patted her little head. After giving her a piece of lean meat, she gestured for her to sit properly. It had been a long time since the old house had been so lively. Aunt Zhang's family of 3, Little Bean's family of 3, Chen Shi's family of 3, and Qin Shueqing's family of 3, this meal was really lively. The table was filled with authentic farmhouse dishes. The little girl giggled as she ate. February was the best time to fish because the water temperature gradually rose at this time, and the fish would begin to move to the shallow water area on the shore. The temperature in the shallow water area rose faster under the sun, and a large number of shrimp, water insects, and plankton gathered there, which also provided a lot of food for the fish. Therefore, there would be groups of fish coming to the shallow water to warm themselves, forage for food, and even prepare for laying eggs in the future. When there were so many fish, it was naturally easy to fish. Fishing in the countryside was not so particular. A thin bamboo pole, a piece of fishing line, and a hook were enough. As for the bait, he just needed to go to the edge of the field and turn over a few stones. The little fellow was still young, so she didn't feel that the earthworms under the stones were disgusting. After Qin she caught more than 10 earthworms and put them into the plastic bag. She followed her father and took one out of the soil under the stones, and then carefully studied it in her hand. Chen Shi looked at her curious appearance and couldn't help but smile and pat her little head. After letting the little fellow put the earthworm into the bag, the father and daughter found a shallow water area on the river bank that faced the sun. The sun in early spring was very bright, and the warm sun shone on the body. The river breeze blew, making people feel refreshed. The little fellow sat on a big stone by the river. Before she started to fish, she was already happily waving the bamboo pole and giggling. After Qin she put the fishing line on her bamboo pole and hung the earthworm. The little fellow followed her father's example and threw the hook into the river under the stone. As the saying goes, Jiang Taigong fishing, those who are willing to take the bait. The crucian carp in early spring was very easy to catch. In addition, Chen Shi used his junqi to drive the nearby fish over, so not long after the little fellow threw the bait, she felt a sudden pulling force on the fishing rod. Seeing this, the little fellow couldn't help but open her eyes wide. She pulled the fishing rod and was stunned for a moment. Then she shouted excitedly, "Papa, Papa, I caught a fish! I caught a fish!" Amazing! Nian Nian, quickly lift the fishing rod, or the fish will break free. Hearing Chen Shi's words, the little fellow lifted the fishing rod and then threw it to the side. A crucian carp was immediately pulled out of the water by her and directly thrown into the sand on the river bank. Seeing that he had really caught a fish, the little guy was so excited that he immediately threw away the fishing rod and ran over to the fish. This crucian carp was not very big, about a jean. After being pulled ashore, it lay on the river bank and kept jumping. Chapter 225. Since they came to the countryside, they naturally had to experience the unique market in the countryside. Going to the market was also called going to the market. The coastal area was called going to the void, the area in Dianzhou was called going to the street, and the area in Lingnan was called going to the business. The names were slightly different, but they all had the same meaning. Going to the market was also a unique product. The The so-called going to the market meant that there was a fixed period of trade in remote places. When the time came, buyers and sellers would come from all over and gather at a certain place to buy and sell. There were not that many shopping malls and small stores in the countryside, so the government could only set a time. Then, everyone would gather at this time to exchange materials and buy biological products in the town. A place like Tongjiegu was not considered remote. It was adjacent to the 108 National Highway, but there was still only one small store. It could only sell small things like oil, salt, sauce, vinegar, snacks, and firecrackers. If the villagers wanted to buy clothes and farm tools, they either had to drive to the county or wait until the market. The town where Tongjiegu was located was called Siping Village. The market in Siping Village was on 3, 6, and 9. That meant that there would be a market on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of every month. There were a total of 9 times a month. It was not too many, but it was not too few either. If a driver often drove through the town, the most annoying situation was not to encounter livestock or children blocking the road, but to coincidentally encounter the market. Usually, there were not many people in the town, but on the day of the market, it would be particularly lively. There would be people coming and going. Not to mention driving, it would be difficult to squeeze through by walking. Therefore, whenever it was time to go to the market, there would always be a traffic jam in the town for half a day. February 26th. It was only 8:30 in the morning, but the family of 7 was happily waiting on the side of the road. It was as if they were waiting for a taxi. They chatted while waiting for the passenger van from the various towns and counties to pass by. The passenger van was also a product of the era. Now, the slightly more developed areas had already banned the operation of the van. Therefore, the passenger van could only be seen in this kind of backward small county. This kind of van was also called the Chong and car. Everyone felt that the Chong and brand was the most practical, so it was called that. The Chong and car was the most common minivan. It could carry 7 people. It was dyed green and yellow with a certificate in front of the window. It was considered an officially recognized operating vehicle. The biggest problem with the van was that it was overloaded. Chapter 226. Gongs and drums cleared the way, and firecrackers sounded. Behind the 8 sedan chairs, there were dozens of people singing for you. Marriage was always a joyous occasion, but the attitude of this group of troublesome youngsters was not very good. They clearly chose to get married on the day of the market, which affected the normal trade of the villagers, but as long as these young people saw someone blocking the sedan chair, they would immediately rush over and yell at the other person to get out of the way. It seemed that in their dictionary, there was no such thing as communication and discussion. An old man probably had bad hearing, but he still stood on the side of the road with a backpack on his back, thinking about what he should buy back. When the young people saw this, they immediately went forward and dragged the old man to the side. It had to be said that these young people were indeed young people. Fortunately, they met an easygoing old man today. Otherwise, if the old man directly fell to the ground, they would not be able to afford it even if they sold them by the weight. As the wedding procession continued to go deeper, more and more people came to the market. In the end, the sedan chair and the folk band could no longer maintain the original speed. Seeing this, the group of young people carried the sound system to the front, and then let them open the way. Like the heavy cavalry of the Middle Ages, the young people carried the sound system with the momentum of a fierce tiger coming down the mountain and forcibly tore open a passage in the lively market. Get out of the way, we brothers are getting married, don't block the way. Brothers, Chuanyu dialect means big brother, get out of the way, ha ha, if you don't get out of the way, do you believe that I won't smash your stall? Get out of the way. Their aggressive posture was quite a bit of the temperament of a local hooligan and street gangster. Those who did not know would think that this street was built by them. Seeing this group of tyrannical young people like the god of plague, the villagers in the market all retreated to the sides of the street, making a spacious passage for them. For a moment, the market that was very lively just now was now only the sound of the sound system and gongs and drums that were still echoing. Seeing this, Chen Shi and his family also retreated to the side of the road and quietly waited for the wedding procession to come from the town. The little fellow did not find the atmosphere strange because she was very interested in the palanquin. Thus, she stretched her neck like a giraffe and stared at the palanquin. This group of young people probably thought that they were soldiers. Escorting the bride was like winning a battle. When they saw that no one dared to stand in front of the group, they proudly sang "For you." In fact, most of these young people were locals. Among the commoners who came to the market, there might be their relatives and elders. However, these youngsters had always lacked discipline. They were used to being unbridled and had no respect for their elders. When they were angered, they could even beat their parents. Naturally, no one dared to stand out and say a few words to them. After all, the children in the countryside lost at the starting line. While the parents of the children in the city were considering which school to choose for their children and which specialty classes to attend, the children in the countryside were still catching grasshoppers in the vast wheat fields, digging for eels, and going to the mountains to catch birds and steal melons. Most of the people in the countryside did not have much education. Junior high school education was already very good. Although the 9-year compulsory education had been popularized, many parents in the countryside still did not have a full understanding of the importance of education. If the child did not want to study, they would find a way for the child. And the so-called way was actually not a good way. Those with better conditions could go to the army, and those with worse conditions could go out to work, either in construction sites, restaurants, hair salons, or car repair shops. In short, wherever people were needed, they would be there. The salary was not high. It was enough to get enough food and clothing in the big city. Of course, there were also many children in the countryside who made a name for themselves. If they were smart, diligent, and sensible, they might find their own way after 3 to 5 years and start their own business. In the end, they might even be more successful than many highly educated people in the city. But such people were always in the minority. Gold would always shine, but the most common thing in the gold beach was still the inconspicuous gravel. Those who could go out to work were already very diligent and sensible. There were also some rural children who, because of the lack of discipline, were lazy all day long. In the end, they became slackers who did nothing all day long, just like the group of young people in front of them. They were the so-called ruffians in the countryside. There was no lack of ruffians anywhere, even in remote places. In the past, the ruffians in the countryside did not see much of the world, so most of them only knew how to make a fuss. It was not until Young and Dangerous was released that they were truly taught how to be a proper ruffian. The Young and Dangerous series of movies had a far greater impact on rural children than ordinary people could imagine. Even if the series had been released for more than 10 or 20 years, it still distorted the values of many young people. At its peak, the 3 words, Chen Haonan, were second only to QQ. It also made chasing girls, one-on-one, and slashing people the 3 most popular things among young people. Then one of the young people could not help but whistle at Qin Run. Chapter 228. If there's wine today, let's drink in the morning. If there's worry tomorrow, let's worry tomorrow. Other than being poor, a hooligan like Chen Hua had never encountered any setbacks. No one dared to scold him at home. Outside, they were all his brothers, so naturally, no one dared to provoke him. This was not the first time Chen Hua had flashed her knife in a fight. In the past, as long as he flashed his knife, even opponents with the physique of fitness trainers would be frightened by Spring Baby. Then, they could only hold their heads and take a beating from him. After all, Hua Xia's laws were indeed a little strange. There was a fine line between normal self-defense and excessive self-defense. No one knew how it would be judged except for the judge. For a scum like Chunwa, who only cared about his life, if he injured someone, he would at most go to the police station for 3 to 5 years. Anyway, he would be a bachelor, and when he came out, he would be a hero again. Moreover, because they had slashed people and gone to jail, they would become even more famous in the pugilistic world. Their social status would also rise exponentially. If he was lucky, he might be noticed by a leader and supported by him. Maybe he would immediately become a big boss who subcontracted a project. Speaking of which, this was a good thing. However, if someone hit him too hard and accidentally hurt him, in addition to having to pay compensation, he might have to go to the police station and leave a stain on his record, which would affect his future career. A normal person would never do something like this, where the loss outweighed the gain in a moment of anger. That was why the ancestor often said, "Bear with it for a while and calm the waves. Take a step back and you'll see the world." That was probably what he meant. Chunwa was used to being tyrannical. Although his physical fitness was not good, he was ruthless and would pull out a knife at the slightest provocation. Therefore, he was somewhat famous in Xing County. Generally, no one dared to provoke him. Unfortunately, Chunwa met Qinshi today. Therefore, when he took out his knife and slashed at Qinshi aggressively, Qinshi immediately grabbed his wrist with one hand, then pulled, twisted, and pushed him. Chunwa's right arm was dislocated by Qinshi on the spot. A dislocated shoulder joint was actually quite scary. It looked as if a large piece of the shoulder was suddenly missing. The entire arm seemed to have no bones, and it was only hanging on the shoulder by the pull of the muscles. Ah! Spring Child looked at his empty shoulder and was immediately frightened. He clutched his arm and let out a squeal like a pig being slaughtered on the spot. This group of hooligans didn't even read many books. Of course, they didn't know how to deal with a dislocated arm. They thought that Chunwa's arm had been broken by Qinshi. When he pulled up the curtain, he could vaguely see that there was a woman in a wedding robe in the palanquin, tidying up her clothes. The man adjusted his belt as he strode in the direction of Chunwa. When he saw Chunwa's dislocated arm, the man did not even say a word of concern and directly kicked her. Then he shouted at the person next to Chunwa, "Why are you standing here with your claws? Hurry up and take her to the hospital." Chunwa was in so much pain that she was drenched in cold sweat. After being kicked, she pursed her lips and did not even dare to make a sound. She lowered her head and walked toward the village clinic with the help of her companions. After Chunwa left, the man turned around and came in front of Qinshi's family. This person was estimated to be less than 40 years old, but he had a domineering aura. When he stood there, he naturally gave off a feeling of power without being angry. Ever since he appeared, the streets had become completely silent. It could be seen that this person's aura was so strong that it was not something that ordinary people could reach. Compared to him, Qinshi seemed a little too ordinary. When the man came in front of Qinshi's family, the young people behind him immediately surrounded Qinshi's family in an umbrella shape. Looking at their posture, it seemed that as long as the old man gave the order, they would immediately rush up and beat Qinshi up. The young people showed an eager look, but after the man took a deep look at Qinshi, he turned around and returned to the palanquin. Mother **Ker, the guests are about to arrive, and you guys are still here causing trouble for me. Hurry up and leave. The man ordered, and the bridal escort team set off again. With their departure, the market also returned to its previous bustle. It was as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then she came to Qinshi's side and began to blame him for being insensible. He actually fought with people on the street. Just when Aunt Zhang was complaining, the owner of the sugar painting stall said to them carefully, "Are you from out of town? Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't waste any more time here." Asterisk 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 asterisk. Digression, the prototype of this story is a relative of mine. He didn't even graduate from primary school. In 2010, he was a scum of society who couldn't even pay back 8,000 yuan. He went to prison for 3 years, but he was chosen by the boss of the construction bureau. In 3 years, he turned from negative assets to a millionaire. When he was building the Yashi Expressway, he rented a sand mine. Now, he is a big boss with tens of millions of assets. But he is a village boy with no background. The big boss is not related to him. Why did he choose him? If you don't know something, it can only mean that you are not experienced enough, so don't come out to show ignorance, okay? Also, the countryside I wrote is different from the countryside you know. Then I want to ask, the country is divided into north and south, mountainous and coastal areas, 23 provinces, 2 special administrative regions, 5 autonomous regions, for municipalities directly under the central government, 282 prefecture-level cities, 374 county-level cities, and countless towns, streets, and communities. How many have you been to? Can you represent the country? Hearing this, she could only nod with a bitter face, but he didn't think so at all. Just now, he was standing by the side, but these bastards still whistled at Rung. What if he wasn't there at that time? What if these scumbags were drinking at that time, or saw such a beautiful woman in a remote place? Could it be that they had to swallow their teeth after being taken advantage of? But although it was a small matter, it involved a matter of principle, so she couldn't bear it at all. Auntie Zhang wasn't a naggy person. After saying a few more words, she sighed deeply and put this matter aside for the time being. Then, she asked the van driver about the situation. The van driver went back and forth between various towns all year round, so he was naturally clear about the surrounding matters. When he heard about the wedding procession made up of dozens of young people, he immediately smiled and said, "Haven't you heard of the name Li Diaming? He loves to do these kinds of things. Today is his wedding, so he must make it more lively." Li Diaming, the man who came out of the palanquin, was the village tyrant in this area, according to the current popular vocabulary. His father was the former high-ranking official of the Siping village party, but he had retired now. Although the village was poor, village bullies were not to be underestimated. A qualified village bully's wealth was no less than the boss of some large enterprises. There were many kinds of village bullies. Because of the country's punishment, the village bullies basically wouldn't use violence to run rampant in the village and prey on the people. They would use other places instead. For example, the village bully who openly embezzled the country's subsidies during the Wenchuan earthquake. This kind of person was the most retarded and deserved to be shot. Those who were slightly smarter would use the method of using agents to contract the forest and mineral resources in the village at a low price. The contract period would be 60 to 70 years, and it would be passed down from generation to generation. More advanced ones, such as the villages near the city, would even involve demolition. Many village bullies were the bosses of real estate companies, and the so-called employees were actually their hired thugs. Li Diaming belonged to the most intelligent type of village bully.